The laughter cut through the Portland dive bar like broken glass. Just a mechanic, Victor Hale sneered, his Armani suit catching the dim light as he pointed at the grease-stained man in flannel. But when CEO Clara Winslow discovered that the quiet mechanic they mocked held secrets that could destroy million-dollar dreams and rebuild them stronger, everything changed. I invite you to follow this story to the end, and comment below which city you're watching from so I can see how far our story has traveled. The rain hammered against the grimy windows of Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar tucked between a pawn shop and a 24-hour laundromat on the forgotten edge of Portland's industrial district. Inside, the air hung thick with cigarette smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer, while a jukebox in the corner wheezed out classic rock hits from 3 decades past. It was the kind of place where construction workers came to wash away the day's labor, where truckers stopped between hauls, and where men like Ethan Cole could sit quietly at the bar without anyone asking questions. Ethan hunched over his whiskey, his broad shoulders curved inward as if shielding himself from the world. Engine grease still darkened the creases of his hands, despite 3 rounds of scrubbing, and his flannel shirt bore the permanent stains of honest work. At 38, his face carried lines that told stories of sleepless nights and heavy decisions, though his eyes, a startling shade of green, held a depth that suggested there was more to him than the calluses on his palms. Another one, Ethan? Murphy, the bar's owner and a Vietnam vet with arms like tree trunks, already had the bottle tilted over Ethan's glass. Just water after this, Ethan replied, his voice low and measured. Sophie's got a science project due tomorrow. Promised I'd help her with the calculations. Murphy's weathered face softened at the mention of Ethan's daughter. That kid's lucky to have you. Not many fathers would turn down a Friday night for homework. She's all I've got, Ethan said simply, taking a small sip of his whiskey. Everything else can wait. The tavern door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold October air and the sound of expensive laughter. 5 men in tailored suits stumbled in, their voices loud with the confidence that came from corner offices and 6-figure bonuses. They commandeered a table near the center of the bar, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere like oil spreading over water. Jesus, what a dump, one of them announced, not bothering to lower his voice. He was tall and lean with perfectly styled dark hair and a watch that probably cost more than most people in the bar made in 3 months. This was Victor Hale, though Ethan didn't know his name yet, only that he carried himself with the kind of arrogance that came from never having dirt under his fingernails. Come on, Victor, another suit laughed, loosening his tie. You said you wanted authentic. This is authentic Portland. Authentic smell, maybe, Victor wrinkled his nose, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe down his chair before sitting. Look at these people. This is what happens when you don't go to college, gentlemen. You end up drinking your paycheck in places like this. The regular patrons shifted uncomfortably, some turning away, others gripping their glasses a little tighter. Ethan remained still, his eyes fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. Hey, barkeep! Victor snapped his fingers at Murphy. 5 whiskeys, and make them doubles, real whiskey, not whatever rotgut you're serving these guys. Murphy's jaw tightened, but he reached for a bottle of Jameson. In a place like this, money was money, even when it came with an attitude. Look at that guy, Victor Stage whispered to his companions, nodding toward Ethan. Probably hasn't seen a shower in days. What do you think he does? Garbage collector? Ditch digger? Mechanic? By the looks of those hands, one of his friends offered, squinting through designer glasses. A mechanic! Victor slapped the table, laughing. Perfect! Hey, mechanic! Ethan didn't turn. Hey! Grease monkey, I'm talking to you. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan set down his glass and turned to face them. His expression was neutral, almost peaceful, but there was something in his eyes that should have warned them. Can I help you? He asked quietly. Yeah, you can help us settle a bet, Victor grinned, showing teeth that had been professionally whitened to an unnatural brightness. My friend here thinks you make, what, $30,000 a year? I'm betting it's less. 25 tops. Am I right? I make enough, Ethan replied evenly. Enough. Victor laughed harder. Enough for what? A studio apartment and a 12-year-old pickup truck? You know what enough gets you these days? Nothing. You're nothing, pal. Just a mechanic who'll spend his whole life with his hands in someone else's engine, while guys like us, he gestured to his group, are building the future of this city. Victor, ease up, one of his companions muttered, noticing how the bar had gone quiet. What? I'm just being honest. This is what's wrong with America. Too many people content with enough. No ambition, no drive. Just punch the clock, drink your beer, and pretend you matter. Ethan stood up slowly, and for the first time, Victor noticed that the mechanic was taller than him, broader, with the kind of strength that came from actual labor, not a gym membership. You're right, Ethan said, his voice carrying across the silent bar. I am just a mechanic. I fix things that are broken. I make sure people can get to work, take their kids to school, visit their families. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And at the end of the day, I can look my daughter in the eye and know I earned every dollar in my pocket. He pulled out a $20 bill, worn soft from use, and placed it on the bar. This covers my drink and theirs, he told Murphy. They're going to need it more than they think. What's that supposed to mean? Victor stood up, his face flushing red. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused. That tie you're wearing. The pattern. It's a Hermes, probably cost you $800. But it's a fake. A good fake, but fake nonetheless. The threading pattern is off by 0.5 millimeter. Most people wouldn't notice, but I spent 3 years working in a shop that restored vintage luxury items before I became just a mechanic. Victor's hand went involuntarily to his tie, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Enjoy your authentic experience, gentlemen, Ethan said, and walked out into the rain. From a corner booth that the suits hadn't noticed, a woman in her early 40s watched the entire exchange with intense interest. Clara Winslow, CEO of Winslow Development Group, had been nursing a gin and tonic while reviewing property assessments on her tablet. She came to Murphy's not for the ambiance, but for the solitude. It was the one place in Portland where nobody recognized her, where she could think without interruption. But the mechanic had interrupted her thoughts entirely. It wasn't his confrontation with Victor. She'd seen plenty of testosterone-fueled bar conflicts. It was the way he'd handled it, the restraint, the precision of his observation about the tie. The way he'd paid for his tormentor's drinks, not out of weakness, but from a position of complete security in who he was. And there was something else, something in the way he'd mentioned his daughter that resonated with her own struggles as a single mother who'd built an empire while raising 2 boys alone. She waited 5 minutes after the suits left, Victor still red-faced and blustering about suing someone, though for what he couldn't quite articulate, before approaching Murphy. The man who just left, she said, sliding a business card across the bar. Ethan, you called him? Murphy eyed her suspiciously. You a cop? Lawyer? Neither. Just someone who recognizes quality when she sees it. She placed a 50 on the bar. Does he come here often? Most Fridays after work. Always leaves early. Good man. Ethan Cole. Keeps to himself. Never causes trouble. Takes care of his kid after her mother split 5 years back. Cole? Clara repeated, filing the name away. The shop where he works? Cole's Auto on Division. His own place. Does good work. Fair prices. Fixed my transmission last year for half what the dealership wanted. Clara thanked him and headed for the door, her mind already turning. She'd built her company by recognizing potential where others saw problems, by finding value in unexpected places. And something about Ethan Cole, the way he'd studied that tie, the quiet authority in his voice, the mention of restoration work, suggested there was more to his story. Meanwhile, Ethan drove through the wet streets in his 2008 Ford F-150, the wipers squeaking against the windshield. He'd bought the truck used when Sophie was 5, the year Angela left, the year everything changed. It wasn't pretty, but it was reliable, and reliability mattered more than appearance when you were the only parent a kid had left. He pulled into the driveway of their small 2-story house on Maple Street, a modest neighborhood where teachers and firefighters lived next to retired dock workers and immigrant families building their American dream one overtime shift at a time. The porch light was on. Sophie always turned it on when she was home alone, even though he'd installed a state-of-the-art security system that had cost him 3 months of savings. Dad! Sophie's voice rang out before he'd even closed the front door. She bounded down the stairs, her dark hair flying behind her, still wearing her school uniform from St. Mary's Academy. "Hey, Butterfly Shaw," he said, catching her in a hug. At 10 years old, she was getting almost too big for their evening ritual, but neither of them was ready to give it up. "How was school?" "Mr. Henderson says my project proposal is too ambitious. He thinks I should do something simpler, like a volcano or a solar system model." "What did you propose?" "A working model of a self-cleaning water filtration system using principles of biomimicry." "I got the idea from that documentary we watched about how wetlands naturally purify water." Ethan smiled, pride warming his chest. "And what did you tell Mr. Henderson?" "That simple is for people who don't want to change the world." "That's my girl. Come on, let's look at those calculations. But first, dinner. Can't change the world on an empty stomach." They moved to the kitchen, where Ethan had started a pot of chili in the slow cooker that morning. It was one of their Friday traditions. He'd prep it before work, and it would be ready when they got home. As they ate, Sophie chattered about her day, her best friend Maria's birthday party next week, and the new book series she'd discovered about girl inventors. "Dad, why don't you ever talk about what you did before the shop?" The question caught him off guard, though he'd been expecting it for years. Sophie was too smart, too observant not to notice the things that didn't quite fit. The architecture books on their shelves, the blueprints he sometimes sketched late at night when he thought she was asleep, the way he could explain complex mathematical concepts that had nothing to do with fixing cars. "What brought this on?" he asked, buying time. "Maria's mom said something weird when she picked me up yesterday. She said it was a shame about what happened with your career, but she wouldn't tell me what she meant." Ethan sighed, setting down his spoon. "Before you were born, before I opened the shop, I did something different. I designed buildings. Like an architect?" "Exactly like an architect. I went to MIT, actually. Graduated summa cum laude." Sophie's eyes widened. "MIT? Dad, that's huge. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I do now. Taking care of you, keeping the shop running, making sure you have everything you need." "But why did you stop?" Ethan chose his words carefully. "When your mom left, I had to make a choice. My architecture firm wanted me to travel constantly, work 80-hour weeks, be available at all hours. Or I could open the shop, set my own hours, and be here for you every day. It wasn't a hard choice." "Do you miss it? Designing buildings?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is that why you sketch at night? I've seen you when you think I'm asleep." Nothing got past this kid. "Old habits die hard." "Can I see them? Your sketches?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They cleared the dinner dishes together, then he led her to his bedroom, to the closet she'd never seen him open. Inside, neat stacks of sketchbooks lined the shelves, dated by year. He pulled out the most recent one. "These are just ideas," he said, opening it to a random page. "Things that float through my head." Sophie gasped. The page showed a detailed drawing of a building that seemed to grow from the earth itself, with living walls and water features that doubled as natural cooling systems. Notes in Ethan's precise handwriting covered the margins. Calculations for load-bearing walls, sustainable material lists, energy efficiency ratings. "Dad, this is incredible. It's like the building is alive." That was the idea. Buildings that don't just sit on the land but work with it, that give back more than they take. "Why don't you build this?" "Because designs are just dreams on paper without someone willing to pay for them. And people with that kind of money don't hire mechanics who used to be architects. They hire firms with reputations, connections, insurance policies worth millions." "That's stupid," Sophie said flatly. "That's business, Butterfly." They spent the next 2 hours working on her science project, Ethan guiding her through the calculations for water flow rates and filtration efficiency. She had her mother's quick grasp of concepts, but Ethan's persistence when things got difficult. Angela had been brilliant but mercurial, giving up when things didn't come easily. Sophie had learned, perhaps too young, that the best things required work. After Sophie went to bed, Ethan sat in his small office, really just a converted breakfast nook, and opened his laptop. He had 3 emails from clients about their cars, one from Sophie's teacher about the upcoming parent-teacher conference, and one from an address he didn't recognize. The sender was Clara Winslow. "Mr. Cole," it read, "I was at Murphy's tonight and witnessed your interaction with those gentlemen. I'm interested in discussing a potential opportunity that might utilize skills beyond automotive repair. If you're amenable, I'll be at Cafe Volta on Sunday at 2 p.m. I understand if you're not interested, but I believe we might have mutually beneficial things to discuss. Clara Winslow, CEO, Winslow Development Group." Ethan read it 3 times. Winslow Development was one of the biggest firms in Portland, known for sustainable urban projects that actually delivered on their promises. He'd followed their work from afar, admiring how they balanced profit with genuine environmental consciousness. And now their CEO wanted to meet with him. He closed the laptop without responding. Whatever Clara Winslow wanted, it would complicate his carefully ordered life. He'd learned the hard way that opportunity often came dressed as disaster, making promises it couldn't keep. But as he lay in bed that night, listening to the rain against the windows, he couldn't stop thinking about the email, about the woman who'd been watching from the corner booth, who'd seen through the scene at the bar to something else, about the sketches hidden in his closet and the dreams he'd buried with them. At 2 a.m., he got up and opened the laptop again. Before he could talk himself out of it, he typed a simple response. "I'll be there." Saturday passed in a blur of oil changes and brake repairs. Ethan threw himself into the work, trying not to think about tomorrow's meeting. Sophie spent the day at Maria's house, working on their science projects together, and Ethan was grateful for the distraction of having the shop to himself. "You're going to strip that bolt if you keep at it like that," a voice said from the doorway. Ethan looked up to find Tom Reeves, a contractor who'd been bringing his trucks to the shop for 5 years. Tom was one of the few people who knew about Ethan's past. They'd actually worked on a project together 15 years ago, before everything fell apart. "Long day," Ethan said, easing off the wrench. "Long something. Heard Victor Hale got his ass handed to him at Murphy's last night." "You know Victor." "Everyone in construction knows Victor. He's Pinnacle Development's new VP of Acquisitions. Cocky son of a bitch who thinks a Harvard MBA means he knows everything about building. Also heard Clara Winslow was asking about you." Ethan's hands stilled. "How'd you hear that?" "Portland's a small city when you're in the business. Clara called me this morning asking about you. Wanted to know if the Ethan Cole with the auto shop was the same one who designed the Riverside Pavilion." The Riverside Pavilion had been Ethan's last project before leaving architecture. It was a community center that had won 3 design awards and was still featured in architectural textbooks as an example of sustainable urban design. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you were the best architect I'd ever worked with, and that the city lost something special when you walked away." "Thomas, I know. You did what you had to do. But talent like yours doesn't just disappear, Ethan. It's still in there, whether you use it or not." After Tom left, Ethan stood in his empty shop, surrounded by the tools of his current trade, thinking about the tools of his former one. The drafting table he'd sold to pay for Sophie's medical bills when she'd had pneumonia at age 6. The specialized software he'd let his licenses lapse on. The network of contacts he'd deliberately severed. But Tom was right about one thing. The talent was still there. In every car he fixed, he saw systems and solutions. In every engine he rebuilt, he applied the same principles of efficiency and elegance he'd once applied to buildings. You could take the architect out of the firm, but you couldn't take the architecture out of the man. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather for Portland. Ethan dressed carefully, not in his work clothes, but not in the suits that still hung in the back of his closet either. He settled on dark jeans and a clean button-down shirt, professional but not pretentious. Sophie was at her study group, working on their science projects at the library. She'd kissed his cheek before leaving and told him he looked nice. Her eyes curious but not pushing. She'd inherited that from him, the ability to wait, to let things reveal themselves in time. Cafe Volta was in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place where coffee cost $8 and came with a lecture about the bean's origin story. Ethan felt out of place the moment he walked in, but then he spotted Clara Winslow at a corner table, and she looked just as uncomfortable with the pretension. She stood when she saw him, extending her hand. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct. Up close, he could see the streaks of silver in her brown hair that she hadn't bothered to dye, the laugh lines that suggested she'd found joy despite whatever struggles had put the steel in her spine. "Miss Winslow, I have to admit, I'm curious why you wanted to meet. Straight to the point. I like that." She sat back down, gesturing for him to join her. "I've been in development for 20 years, Mr. Cole. I've learned to recognize when things don't add up. A mechanic who spots fake Hermes ties, who restores vintage luxury items, who speaks with the precision of someone used to making every word count. That's a story with missing pieces. Everyone has a past. True. But not everyone's past includes graduating summa cum laude from MIT's School of Architecture and Design." Ethan's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "You've done your homework." "I have. The Riverside Pavilion, the Hartley Building, the proposed Sky Garden project that would have revolutionized urban green spaces if it had been built. You were being called the future of sustainable architecture, and then you just disappeared." "I had my reasons." "Your daughter, Sophie, isn't it? Your wife left when she was 5, and you chose fatherhood over fame, opened an auto shop to have stable hours and be present for her. If you know all this, why am I here?" Clara leaned forward. "Because I have a problem that needs exactly the kind of mind that can see both the forest and the trees, that understands systems and sustainability, that can take something broken and not just fix it, but make it better. And because I think you have a problem too, a brilliant mind that's slowly suffocating under the weight of oil changes and brake jobs. I'm content with my life. Content and fulfilled are two different things." She pulled out a tablet, swiping to bring up a series of images. "Do you know the Riverside Complex?" Ethan knew it. Everyone in Portland knew it. 40 acres of contaminated industrial land along the Willamette River, poisoned by decades of chemical manufacturing. Multiple developers had tried to tackle it, but the cleanup costs always exceeded the potential profits. Victor Hale, yes, your friend from the bar, has convinced Pinnacle Development to partner with us on a project there. They bring the capital, we bring the expertise. The plan is to cap the contamination, build luxury condos on top, and market them as riverfront paradise. That's insane. Capping doesn't solve the problem. It just hides it. The first major flood, and you'll have toxic soup spreading through the entire development. "I know." Claire's eyes gleamed. "Victor doesn't. Neither does Pinnacle's board. They see dollar signs, waterfront property at bargain prices because of the contamination. They're pushing to start construction within 6 months. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe there's a better way, a right way. But I need someone who can see it, design it, and more importantly, explain it in terms that make financial sense to people who care more about quarterly returns than quarterly centuries. You have architects on staff. I have architects who've learned to color inside the lines, to give clients what they want rather than what they need. I need someone who remembers why we build in the first place, not just to make money, but to create spaces where people live, work, thrive. Someone who understands that the foundation determines everything that comes after." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying the images on the tablet. His mind was already working, seeing possibilities, calculating loads and water tables and phytoremediation potential. "I'm just a mechanic," he said finally. "No," Clara said firmly. "You're a mechanic by choice, an architect by training, and a problem solver by nature. I'm not asking you to give up your shop or compromise your priorities with Sophie. I'm asking for consultation, a few hours a week initially. Look at the plans, tell me what's wrong with them, help me find a better way. And if I say no, then you go back to your shop and I go back to fighting a losing battle against people who see land as commodity rather than community. But either way, Mr. Cole, you're not just a mechanic. The only question is whether you're ready to admit it." She stood, leaving a folder on the table. "The current plans and site assessments. My direct number is inside. Take a few days, think about it. But not too long. Victor's pushing for a groundbreaking ceremony before Christmas, wants to impress the board with his initiative." After she left, Ethan sat in the overpriced coffee shop, staring at the folder. He thought about Sophie's science project, about buildings that gave back more than they took. He thought about the sketches hidden in his closet, dreams deferred but not dead, He thought about Victor Hale's sneer and the satisfaction of proving that being just anything was its own form of blindness. He opened the folder. The plans were worse than he'd imagined. Not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. The kind of cost-cutting shortcuts that looked good on paper but would fail catastrophically in practice. His trained eye spotted a dozen critical flaws in the first scan. Inadequate foundation depth for the soil type, no consideration for seasonal water table fluctuations, materials that would react badly with residual chemicals in the ground. But beneath the problems, he saw potential. The site's contamination was primarily heavy metals and petroleum products, treatable with the right approach. The river access could be an asset if properly managed. The proximity to downtown made it valuable for more than just luxury condos. His phone buzzed. Sophie texting from the library. "Dad, my project is going amazing!" "Maria's mom says I think like an engineer. Wonder where I get that from?" Ethan smiled, tucking the folder under his arm. Maybe it was time to stop hiding who he'd been. Maybe showing Sophie that you could be more than one thing, that life was about both choices and changes, was just as important as showing her how to be steady and reliable. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan spread the plans across his dining room table. He pulled out pencils he hadn't touched in years, graph paper that had yellowed at the edges, and began to sketch, not just pointing out what was wrong, but showing what could be right. By dawn, he had 20 pages of notes and preliminary drawings. A vision for something revolutionary, not luxury condos that ignored the land's history, but a mixed-use development that would actively heal the contamination while providing affordable housing, commercial space, and public parks. It would cost more initially, but save millions in long-term liability and maintenance. More importantly, it would transform a poisoned wasteland into a living, breathing part of the city. He photographed everything and emailed it to Clara with a simple message. "We need to talk. And bring someone who can stand up to Victor Hale, because he's going to hate every word of this." The response came back within an hour. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m., my office." "And Mr. Cole? I've been standing up to men like Victor my entire career. The question is whether you're ready to stand with me." Ethan looked at his work clothes hanging on the back of the door, then at the sketches covering his table. For 5 years, he'd been just a mechanic, and it had been enough. But Sophie was right. Simple was for people who didn't want to change the world. Maybe it was time to be complicated again. The next morning arrived too quickly, and Ethan found himself standing outside the Winslow Development Group building at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, out of habit. The structure was everything he'd expected from Clara's company, renovated rather than demolished, with original 1920s brickwork preserved alongside modern glass additions that somehow complemented rather than competed with the historic elements. It was architecture that told a story of respect for what came before while embracing what could come next. "Mr. Cole," Clara's assistant, a young man with kind eyes and an efficient manner, greeted him in the lobby. "Ms. Winslow is expecting you, 12th floor." The elevator ride gave Ethan time to second-guess himself. What was he doing? He had a stable life, a thriving business, a daughter who needed consistency. But then he thought about Sophie's face when she'd seen his sketches, the pride in her eyes when she'd said, "Dad, this is incredible." Maybe showing her that dreams didn't have to die, just transform, was worth the risk. Clara's office occupied a corner of the top floor, with windows facing both the river and Mount Hood in the distance. But what struck Ethan wasn't the view, it was the workspace itself. No pristine executive desk or intimidating conference table. Instead, drafting tables covered with plans, walls lined with project boards, and in one corner, a collection of hard hats with dates and project names written on them in Sharpie. "You actually work here," Ethan said, surprised. Clara looked up from where she was reviewing his emailed sketches, already printed and spread across her drafting table. "As opposed to... Most executives I knew had offices for show and did their real work elsewhere." "Then you knew the wrong executives." She gestured to a chair beside her. "These drawings! You did all of this last night." "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I. Occupational hazard of single parenthood." She traced a finger along one of his foundation designs. "This bioremediation system, it's brilliant. Using the contamination itself is part of the solution. Heavy metals can be extracted by certain plants, phytoremediation. The petroleum products can be broken down by specifically cultivated bacteria. Instead of capping the problem, we solve it. It takes longer, costs more initially, but in 10 years you have clean land instead of a toxic time bomb. How long since you've drawn like this? 5 years, 6 months, and 12 days. Clara's eyebrows rose at the precision. The day I signed the papers to close my firm, Ethan explained, I told myself I was done with architecture. Yet you kept the drafting tools, and the books, and the subscriptions to 3 architectural journals that I read late at night when I can't sleep. He shrugged. You can leave the profession, but it doesn't leave you. No, it doesn't. Clara pulled up a chair beside him. Let me tell you what we're really facing here. Victor Hale has the Pinnacle Board convinced that this Riverside project is their ticket to competing with the big West Coast developers. Quick turnaround, massive profit margins, minimal investment in actual remediation. They've already started marketing it. Riverside Lux, they're calling it. Marketing what doesn't exist yet. Welcome to modern development. Sell the dream, worry about reality later. They've got a groundbreaking scheduled for December 15th, full media circus planned. The mayor's supposed to attend. That's 8 weeks away. 7 weeks and 5 days, actually. Victor's very precise about his timeline. He wants to be able to tell the board that he's ahead of schedule by year's end, position himself for a promotion to senior VP. And you're his partner in this? Clara's expression darkened. On paper. In reality, I've been fighting him every step of the way. But I'm outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Pinnacle has more capital, more political connections. The only card I have is my reputation for delivering successful projects. And Victor's working to undermine that by painting me as an obstructionist who doesn't understand modern development. Why not walk away? Because 40 acres of poisoned land won't heal itself. Because the families who'll eventually live there deserve better than toxic soil under their children's playground. Because someone has to give a damn about doing things right, even when it's harder and costlier and thankless. Ethan studied her face, seeing in it the same exhaustion he felt, the weight of fighting battles that mattered against people who didn't care. What exactly are you asking me to do? Initially, review the plans thoroughly. Document every flaw, every danger, every corner cut. Give me ammunition that even Pinnacle's board can't ignore. But more than that. She pulled out a contract. I want you as a consultant, not full-time. I know you have the shop and Sophie, but 20 hours a week, your own schedule, working directly with me to develop an alternative proposal. And if Victor objects, he will. Loudly and probably profanely. But here's the thing about Victor. He's all flash, no foundation. He can sell ice to Eskimos, but he can't tell you the load-bearing capacity of that ice or whether it'll last through summer. The board tolerates him because he makes them money, but they're not stupid. If we can show them that his plan is genuinely dangerous, that the liability could destroy them. She smiled, and it was sharp as winter wind. Well, even greed has its limits when faced with bankruptcy. Ethan read through the contract. The pay was more than he made in a month at the shop for a week's worth of consulting. It included provisions for flexible hours, no travel requirements, and a clause that specifically stated his work would focus on sustainable remediation solutions. This is generous, he said. It's fair. You're not just bringing architectural expertise, you're bringing fresh eyes, uncompromised vision, and most importantly, you have no political debts to anyone in this city's development community. You can say things my staff can't, see things they've been trained to overlook. When would you need an answer? Now would be good. Victor's presenting his accelerated timeline to both boards tomorrow. I'd like to counter with concerns backed by someone whose credentials he can't dismiss. Ethan thought about Sophie, about the shop, about the comfortable routine he'd built. Then he thought about buildings rising from poisoned ground, about families trusting that someone had done the right thing, about his daughter learning that integrity meant standing up even when sitting down was easier. He signed the contract. Good, Clara said, but before she could continue, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted from satisfaction to concern. Victor's here. He wasn't supposed to be in until noon. Want me to leave? No. Actually, this might be perfect. Let's see how he reacts to you being here. Just remember, he doesn't know yet that you're working with me." The door burst open without a knock. Victor Hale stood there in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his face already red with whatever rage had driven him here early. "Clara, we need to—" He stopped mid-sentence, seeing Ethan. His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and then fury. "What the hell is the grease monkey doing here?" "Mr. Cole is consulting on the Riverside project," Clara said calmly. "Cole?" Victor laughed, but it was ugly. "The mechanic? You hired a mechanic to consult on a $40 million development?" "I hired an MIT-trained architect with 15 years of experience in sustainable development who happens to currently run an automotive shop," Clara corrected. "Mr. Cole designed the Riverside Pavilion, among other notable projects." The color drained from Victor's face, then rushed back twice as red. "That's impossible. I would have known—" "Would you?" Ethan asked quietly. "Just like you knew that Hermes tie was authentic?" "You son of a—" "Careful, Victor," Clara warned. "You're in my office, talking about my consultant. Whatever testosterone-fueled grudge you're nursing from Friday night stays outside these walls." Victor visibly struggled to control himself, his hands clenching and unclenching. "Fine. But he's not qualified. 5 years out of the industry." "Makes me objective," Ethan interrupted. "I've got nothing to gain from telling you what you want to hear, and everything to gain from telling the truth. Your current plans call for a foundation depth of 30 feet. The contamination plume goes down 45 feet in the southeastern section. You hit that plume during construction, and you're looking at a hazmat situation that'll shut down the project for months, maybe permanently. The environmental report said 30 feet was sufficient. The environmental reports were based on samples from 5 years ago, before the water table shift of 2022. You'd know that if anyone had bothered to check the geological survey updates." Victor pulled out his phone, presumably to verify Ethan's claims. His expression grew increasingly grim as he scrolled. "Even if that's true, it is. We can adjust the foundation depth and add $8 million to your construction costs, minimum, plus delays for new permits, additional environmental assessments. Your December groundbreaking becomes March at the earliest. That's unacceptable." "That's reality," Ethan said. "Unless you'd prefer to go ahead as planned and explain to the board why their luxury development is sitting on top of a toxic plume that's seeping into the basements." Clara pulled out a folder. "Mr. Cole has identified 17 critical issues with the current plans. Would you like to go through them all now, or should we save it for tomorrow's board meeting?" Victor's face had gone from red to purple. "This is sabotage. You're trying to tank the project because you don't have the vision to see its potential." "I see its potential perfectly," Clara said. "Potential for lawsuits, environmental disasters, and the kind of publicity that destroys companies. But Mr. Cole has also developed an alternative approach that would actually remediate the contamination while creating a sustainable, profitable development." "I don't care what the mechanic thinks." "Then you're a fool," Ethan said, standing. He'd kept his voice level, but there was steel in it now. "And you're exactly the kind of developer who's destroyed public trust in this industry. You see land as commodity, buildings as profit margins, and people as either customers or obstacles. You don't build anything, Victor. You just stack expensive boxes on poisoned ground and hope nobody notices the foundation is rotten." "Get out," Victor snarled. "You're done here. I'll have you removed from this project." "Try it," Clara said, also standing. "I have equal authority on this project, and I've hired Mr. Cole under my discretionary budget. You want to challenge that, we can take it to both boards and explain why you're trying to silence the one person actually looking out for their interests." Victor stormed toward the door, then turned back. "You know what your problem is, Clara? You still think this business is about building things that matter. It's not. It's about building things that sell. And your mechanic friend here? He's been out of the game so long he probably still thinks integrity matters more than profit margins." "It does," Ethan said simply. Victor laughed. "Then you're both fossils. Dinosaurs trying to survive in a world that's evolved past you." December 15th, Clara, groundbreaking, with or without your support. After he left, Clara sank back into her chair. "Well, that went about as well as expected. He's going to make this difficult. He's going to try. But Victor has one weakness. He genuinely doesn't understand the technical aspects of development. He's a money man, a salesman. When faced with actual engineering and architectural facts, he deflects or blusters. Tomorrow's board meeting, with both Pinnacle and Winslow boards present, is our chance to expose that. You want me there? If you're willing. Fair warning, it could get ugly. Victor doesn't like being challenged, especially in front of people who control his career. I've handled worse. Ethan gathered his copies of the sketches. I should get to the shop. I have 3 cars scheduled for this morning. The contract allows for flexible hours. I know, but those customers are counting on me, just like future residents of Riverside are counting on someone to do the right thing. He paused at the door. Email me the full environmental reports and the board meeting agenda. I'll have a comprehensive analysis ready by tomorrow. Ethan? Claire called as he reached the door. Thank you for seeing what needs to be seen and saying what needs to be said. Just doing what I should have been doing all along, he replied. The shop was already busy when he arrived, with Tom Reeves' truck in Bay 1 and Mrs. Chen's Honda in Bay 2. Marcus, his part-time assistant, had already started on the Honda's oil change. Boss, you look different, Marcus said, studying him. You win the lottery or something. Something like that, Ethan said, pulling on his coveralls. But as he slid under Tom's truck to examine the exhaust system, his mind was elsewhere, calculating load distributions and soil remediation rates, seeing not just what was broken, but how to fix it right. Ethan? Tom's voice echoed from above. You good under there? Yeah, Tom. Better than I've been in years. That afternoon, while replacing brake pads on a Subaru, Ethan's phone rang. Sophie's school. Mr. Cole? This is Principal Morrison. There's been an incident with Sophie. Ethan's heart stopped. Is she hurt? No, nothing like that. But she got into an altercation with another student. We need you to come in. Ethan was there in 15 minutes, finding Sophie sitting outside the principal's office with a defiant expression and a scratch on her cheek. What happened? He asked, kneeling beside her. Bradley Hale said you were just a stupid mechanic who tried to act important at his dad's bar, Sophie said, her jaw set. So I told him his dad was a liar who wore fake designer clothes and built fake buildings that would fall down. Ethan closed his eyes. Of course Victor had a son at St. Mary's. Of course that son would have heard about Friday night. And then he pushed me, so I pushed him back, and then... She shrugged. I might have mentioned that his dad probably needed a mechanic to fix his personality because it was obviously broken. Despite everything, Ethan had to fight not to smile. Sophie, I know. Violence isn't the answer. But Dad, he was saying things about you, mean things, wrong things. People are going to say mean and wrong things sometimes. That doesn't mean we respond with our fists. I didn't use my fists. I used my words. Then he used his fists, so I defended myself. She looked up at him. You taught me that, to defend myself and others when necessary. Principal Morrison, a stern woman who'd run St. Mary's for 20 years, called them in. Bradley Hale was already there with his mother, a thin woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Cole, Mrs. Hale, the principal began. We have a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations. That girl attacked my son, Mrs. Hale interrupted, not looking at Ethan or Sophie. According to witnesses, Bradley initiated physical contact, Principal Morrison corrected. However, both children escalated the situation. Both will receive 3 days of in-school suspension. This is outrageous, Mrs. Hale said. Bradley was simply defending his father's honor. By spreading gossip and pushing a girl? Ethan asked quietly. Mrs. Hale finally looked at him, and he saw recognition dawn. You're the one Victor was talking about. The mechanic who told your husband the truth about his tie and his plans? Ethan met her gaze steadily. Yes, that was me. And if your son is learning that violence is an acceptable response to wounded pride, perhaps you should be more concerned about what's being taught at home than what's happening at school. How dare you? Mom, Bradley said quietly. Can we just go? The boy looked miserable, and Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. It wasn't Bradley's fault his father was Victor Hale. After the Hales left, Principal Morrison turned to Sophie. This isn't like you, Sophie. You're one of our best students. What happened? I stood up for my dad, Sophie said simply, and I'd do it again. Sophie, Ethan started. No, Dad. You've spent 5 years being just a mechanic because you thought that's what I needed. But what I need is to see you be who you really are. All of it. The architect and the mechanic and the dad who gives up everything for his daughter, and the man who stands up to bullies in bars even when it would be easier to stay quiet. Principal Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Cole, I understand there's more to this situation than schoolyard conflict, but Sophie needs to understand that there are better ways to handle confrontation. She knows, Ethan said. We'll discuss it at home. The suspension, when does it start? Tomorrow. She'll report to the library instead of regular classes, complete her assignments there. On the drive home, Sophie was quiet until they pulled into their driveway. Are you mad? I'm complicated, Ethan admitted. Mad that you got into a fight. Proud that you stood up for what's right. Worried about what this means for your school experience. Bradley Hale is a jerk, but he's not dangerous. He's just repeating what his dad says. And his dad says a lot of things. Ethan turned to face her. Sophie, there's something I need to tell you. I'm working with Clara Winslow now, consulting on a project that Victor Hale is also involved in. Things might get difficult. More difficult than me being suspended? Differently difficult. Victor doesn't like being challenged, and I'm about to challenge him very publicly. Sophie grinned. Good. Someone should. And Dad? That stuff I said to Bradley about his dad's buildings falling down? Was I right? If built according to his current plans, they wouldn't fall, but they'd slowly poison everyone living in them. Then stop him. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, Sophie said firmly. You know what's right and what's wrong. You have the skills to prove it. So prove it. Show everyone that being just a mechanic doesn't mean you don't matter. Show them what I've always known, that you're extraordinary. That evening, after Sophie had finished her homework, suspension or not, academics came first, Ethan spread out all the Riverside documents on the dining room table. He had less than 24 hours to prepare for the board meeting, to condense 5 years of suppressed expertise into a presentation that could stop Victor's dangerous plan. Sophie brought him coffee at 10 p.m., one of their role reversals that had started when she was 8, and determined to be helpful. What's that? She asked, pointing to a series of calculations. Water table fluctuation models. See, the contamination isn't static. It moves with groundwater flow. Victor's plan ignores that movement. So the poison would spread? Potentially, or rise during flood seasons. His cap solution is like putting a Band-Aid on an infected wound without cleaning it first. And your solution? Ethan pulled over his sketches. Biological remediation. Plants that absorb heavy metals. Bacteria that break down petroleum products. Combined with structured water management that prevents spread while treatment occurs. It would take 3 years instead of 6 months, but at the end the land would actually be clean. Sophie studied the drawings. It's like my water filtration project, but huge. Exactly like that. Natural system solving human-made problems. Dad? Can I come tomorrow? To the board meeting? It's during school hours. Well, suspension hours. Educational experience? Please? I promise I'll be quiet. Ethan considered. Maybe seeing her father fight for something that mattered would be worth more than a day in the library. Fine. But you dress professionally and stay silent unless asked a direct question. Deal. They worked together until midnight, Sophie asking questions that helped Ethan refine his explanations, making complex concepts accessible. She had a gift for seeing to the heart of things, for understanding not just how things worked, but why they mattered. The next morning, Ethan dressed in his only remaining suit, the one he'd worn to his last architectural presentation 5 years ago. It still fit, mostly, though his shoulders were broader from years of manual labor. Sophie wore her best school uniform with a blazer she'd borrowed from Maria. We look good, she declared, checking them both in the mirror. We look ready, Ethan corrected, though he wasn't sure that was true. The meeting was at Pinnacle's headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that screamed money and power. Ethan hadn't been in a building like this since leaving architecture, and the familiar smell of expensive coffee and leather furniture brought back memories he'd worked hard to bury. Clara met them in the lobby, her eyebrows rising at Sophie's presence. Educational experience, Ethan explained. I like it. Nothing says, think about the future, like having an actual child present. She handed him a folder. Victor's been working the room already, painting you as a disgruntled former architect with a grudge. Be ready for hostility. The boardroom was on the 40th floor with views of the entire city. 20 people sat around a massive oak table, 10 from Pinnacle's board, 8 from Winslow's, and Victor with his assistant. They all turned when Ethan entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor said, not bothering to stand, the mechanic has arrived. And he brought his daughter. How quaint. Mr. Cole is here at my request, Clara said firmly. His analysis of the Riverside project has revealed critical issues that need addressing. His analysis? Victor laughed. He's been out of architecture for 5 years. He fixes cars, for God's sake. I fix broken things, Ethan said, moving to the presentation screen. Cars, buildings, plans that will poison families. It's all about understanding systems and solving problems correctly rather than quickly. He pulled up his first slide, a cross-section of the Riverside site showing contamination plumes. Your current environmental assessment is based on obsolete data. The contamination extends 15 feet deeper than reported and has spread laterally due to water table changes from upstream development. That's speculation, Victor started. That's fact. Ethan pulled up the geological surveys, the dates highlighted. These are public records, available to anyone who bothers to look. Your plan to cap the contamination at 30 feet will fail within 18 months, likely sooner if we have a wet winter. He moved through slide after slide, each one documenting a flaw, a shortcut, a danger. The board members began shifting uncomfortably, some taking notes, others shooting glances at Victor, who was growing redder by the minute. Even if these issues exist, one of Pinnacle's board members said, James Crawford, according to his nameplate, addressing them would add millions to the budget and years to the timeline. Or, Ethan said, pulling up his alternative designs, we could do it right the first time. The room went quiet as he revealed his vision for Riverside. Not just luxury condos, but a mixed-use development that would actively heal the land while providing housing across economic brackets. Parks that were actually bioremediators, buildings that breathed with living walls, infrastructure that worked with nature rather than against it. The initial cost is 12% higher, he admitted, but operational costs are 40% lower. More importantly, you're not building on a time bomb. You're creating something that will last generations, appreciate in value, and most importantly, won't result in lawsuits when families start getting sick from toxic exposure. This is fantasy, Victor spat. Hippie architecture that sounds good in theory, but fails in practice. Like the Riverside Pavilion failed, Ethan asked quietly. That hippie architecture has won 3 international awards and has the lowest operational costs of any community center on the West Coast. You designed the Riverside Pavilion? Crawford asked, his interest clearly piqued. Among other projects, yes. Then why are you fixing cars? Ethan glanced at Sophie, who was watching everything with intense focus. Because sometimes life requires us to choose between ambition and obligation. I chose obligation. But that doesn't mean I forgot everything I learned or stopped caring about building things that matter. Mr. Cole, another board member spoke up, Patricia Wong from Winslow's board. Your proposal is intriguing, but the timeline concerns me. 3 years versus 6 months is a significant difference. Would you rather spend 6 months building something that fails or 3 years building something that succeeds? Ethan asked. The choice isn't between fast and slow, it's between wrong and right. That's a false dichotomy, Victor protested. We can address the contamination issues without completely reimagining the project. How? Ethan challenged. Show me one successful development built on capped contamination without eventual environmental issues. Just one. Victor's assistant frantically searched on his tablet, whispering in Victor's ear. The silence stretched uncomfortably. The board needs to vote on whether to proceed with the December groundbreaking, Crawford finally said. Mr. Hale, can you guarantee that your plan won't result in environmental liability? I. There are always risks in development. Mr. Cole, Crawford turned to Ethan. Can you guarantee your approach would work? I can guarantee it's been successfully implemented in 12 similar sites across the country. I can provide case studies, contact information for the developers, even soil samples showing complete remediation. But more than that. Ethan pulled out a final document. I can guarantee that if you go ahead with Mr. Hale's plan, I'll personally ensure every potential resident knows exactly what they're building on. Public records are public for a reason. Are you threatening us? Victor snarled. I'm promising transparency. Something that seems to be lacking in your approach. Dad, Sophie said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. May I? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Sophie stood, all 4'8" of her radiating confidence. My name is Sophie Cole. I'm 10 years old, and I want to be an environmental engineer when I grow up. I've been studying biomimicry and phytoremediation for my science project, and I have a question for Mr. Hale. Victor looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't figure out how to silence a child without looking monstrous. If you build these condos and families move in, where will their kids play? On playgrounds built over poison? Will you tell parents that the sandbox might be contaminated? That the grass their children roll in might make them sick? Or will you just take their money and hope they never find out? That's an oversimplification. No, Sophie said firmly. It's a simple question. Will you tell them the truth or won't you? The room was dead silent. My dad fixes things, Sophie continued. He could have kept being a big important architect, but he chose to fix cars so he could take care of me. Now he's trying to fix this because it's the right thing to do. Maybe you should listen to someone who gave up everything for what matters instead of someone who'd risk everything for what sells. She sat down, her face flushed but determined. Crawford cleared his throat. I motion to postpone the December groundbreaking pending a full review of both proposals. Seconded, Wong added immediately. This is ridiculous, Victor exploded. We're delaying a $40 million project because a mechanic and his kid made a presentation? We're delaying, Crawford said coldly, because you apparently failed to do basic due diligence. Mr. Cole found these issues in, 2 days? What does that say about your preparation? I want a full environmental reassessment, another board member added. Independent firm, no connection to either company. And I want Mr. Cole officially added to the project team, Clara said, as lead consultant on environmental remediation. That's not your call, Victor started. Actually it is, Crawford interrupted. According to the partnership agreement, either managing partner can appoint consultants within budget. Mr. Cole, what would your consulting fee be? Ethan named a figure that was reasonable but significant, enough to show he valued his expertise but not so much as to seem greedy. Approved, Crawford said. Mr. Hale, you'll work with Mr. Cole to revise the plans. I won't. You will, or Pinnacle will find another VP of acquisitions who can. Crawford's tone brooked no argument. This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to review the revised proposals. As the board members filed out, Victor approached Ethan, his face twisted with rage. You think you've won? You've just made an enemy you can't afford, mechanic. I've made an enemy who values appearances over substance, Ethan replied calmly. That's an enemy I can handle. We'll see about that. Victor stormed out, his assistant scrambling to keep up. Clara waited until they were alone, then smiled. A real smile, not the professional one she wore like armor. That was magnificent, both of you. I thought you said I should stay quiet, Sophie said to her father. I said stay quiet unless asked a direct question. Crawford asked if the plan could be guaranteed to work. You answered by showing why Victor's plan was guaranteed to fail. That's called strategic intervention. Is that what you call it when you break the rules, but it works out? Sophie asked innocently. That's what I call it when someone speaks truth to power, Clara said. Sophie, your father's lucky to have you. I know, Sophie grinned. He tells me all the time. As they walked to the elevator, Ethan felt something shift inside him, like a door opening after being locked for years. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, or rather, He was a mechanic and an architect and a father, and someone who stood up when standing up mattered. "Dad?" Sophie asked as they waited for the elevator. "Are you going to close the shop?" "No, but I might need to hire another mechanic to help Marcus when I'm consulting." "Tom Reeves' son just got certified," Sophie suggested. "He's looking for work." "How do you know that?" "I pay attention. Same way I knew Bradley Hale would back down if challenged. Bullies usually do when someone stands up to them." The elevator arrived, and as they descended, Ethan watched the city spread out below them. Somewhere out there, 40 acres of poisoned land waited for someone to heal it. It wouldn't be easy or quick or simple, but then again, the best things never were. The Portland rain had returned with vengeance that evening, drumming against the windows of Ethan's home office as he worked through contamination reports that Victor's team had mysteriously forgotten to include in their original assessment. Sophie was at the kitchen table, her science project having evolved into something that looked suspiciously like a miniature version of his Riverside plans, complete with tiny plants and test tubes demonstrating phytoremediation. "Dad, how long does it take heavy metals to leach into groundwater?" she called out. "Depends on soil composition and rainfall," he answered, not looking up from his calculations. "Why?" "I'm adding a timeline component to my project. Mr. Henderson says it's too advanced, but I told him real science doesn't care about grade levels." The doorbell rang, unusual for 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Ethan found Clara standing on his porch, soaked despite her umbrella, holding a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that mixed exhaustion with determination. "We need to talk," she said. "Victor's been busy." Ethan let her in, noticing how she seemed smaller outside her CEO armor, more human in jeans and a rain-spotted sweater. Sophie looked up from her project with interest. "Miss Winslow, are you here about the bad man who wants to poison people?" "Sophie," Ethan warned. "What? That's what he's doing, isn't it?" Sophie turned back to Clara. "Would you like some coffee? Dad makes really good coffee when he's stressed." "I'd love some," Clara said, and Ethan could see her fighting a smile. While Ethan made coffee, Clara examined Sophie's project, asking questions that showed she understood the science as well as the business of development. Sophie explained her theories with the passionate precision of someone who'd inherited both her parents' intelligence, though she'd only known one of them long enough to recognize it. "Your daughter's brilliant," Clara told Ethan when Sophie finally went upstairs to finish homework. "She gets that from her mother," Ethan said automatically, then caught himself. "Sorry, habit." "No need to apologize. We all have our stories." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. "Speaking of stories, Victor's been crafting one about you. He's spreading word that you're a failed architect who couldn't hack it in the real world, that you're trying to use this project to resurrect a dead career." "Let him talk." "It's more than talk. He's hired a private investigator to dig into your past. He's looking for anything to discredit you: failed projects, angry clients, personal scandals." Ethan sat down across from her. "He won't find much. I was boring even when I was successful." "What about your wife? Ex-wife?" "Angela's in Barcelona, last I heard. She's an artist, always was. Being tied to one place, one person, one life. It was killing her slowly. When she left, she said I'd turned her into someone she didn't recognize. She was probably right. That must have been difficult. The leaving was easy, actually. We'd been strangers living in the same house for years. The hard part was explaining to a 5-year-old why Mommy loved her but couldn't stay. Sophie used to sit by the window every evening, certain Angela would come back. She did that for 6 months before I finally convinced her that sometimes love means letting go. Clara stared into her coffee. My husband died 8 years ago. Heart attack at his desk, working on a project he hated for people he despised. I found him there at midnight when he didn't come home. He was 39. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me that life's too short to build things that don't matter. That's why I started Winslow Development, to prove that profitable and principled weren't mutually exclusive. She looked up at him. That's why I need you on this project. You understand what I'm trying to do. What you're trying to do is admirable. But Victor's not going to stop. He sees this as a zero-sum game. Either he wins or you do. Then we need to make sure we win. Clara pulled out her tablet. I've been doing my own research. Did you know Victor's last 3 projects all had environmental violations within 2 years of completion? How did he keep his job? By settling quietly, burying the reports, and moving on to the next project before the problems fully surfaced. But there's a pattern, and patterns tell stories. She showed him a series of documents. The Meadowbrook Estates in Seattle, 15 families with respiratory issues. The Riverside Commons in Tacoma, groundwater contamination that required a complete water system replacement. The Pearl District Tower here in Portland, still in litigation over toxic mold that appeared within 6 months of opening. This is damning. It would be if anyone connected the dots, but each incident was handled by different law firms, different insurance companies, different regulatory bodies. Victor's very good at compartmentalizing disasters. So connect the dots. Show the board the pattern. I tried. Crawford told me to focus on the future, not the past. Wong said bringing up old projects would look like a smear campaign. They want to believe Victor because he makes them money, and it's easier to ignore warning signs than acknowledge them. Ethan stood, pacing to the window where rain continued its assault on the glass. Then we need something current, something undeniable. Like what? Like proof that he's actively falsifying environmental data for Riverside. Claire's eyes sharpened. Do you have that? Not yet. But his assistant looked panicked during the board meeting when Victor claimed the contamination was contained at 30 feet. Either he knows something or suspects something. Marcus Chen, been with Victor for 2 years, came from an environmental consulting firm originally. Clara made a note. He might be persuadable if approached correctly. No. Ethan turned from the window. We don't manipulate people into doing the right thing. That makes us no better than Victor. Then what do you suggest? We keep documenting everything, every shortcut, every discrepancy, every place where the data doesn't match reality. And we build an alternative that's so clearly superior that even Victor's supporters can't ignore it. That's a long game. The best solutions usually are. Before Clara could respond, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number, but something made him answer. Mr. Cole? This is Marcus Chen, Victor Hale's assistant? I need to talk to you. It's about the Riverside project. There are things you should know. Ethan met Marcus's eyes across the small cafe on Alberta Street, one of those places that served ethically sourced coffee and locally made pastries to people who could afford to care about such distinctions. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually precise appearance disheveled, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped his cup. Thank you for coming, Marcus said. I wasn't sure you would. You said there were things I should know. I'm listening. Marcus pulled out a flash drive, sliding it across the table like it was radioactive. The real environmental reports, not the edited versions Victor submitted to the board. Ethan pocketed the drive carefully. Why are you giving me this? Because I have a daughter too. She's 3. And when that little girl, Sophie, asked if Victor would tell parents the truth about the contamination, Marcus's voice broke slightly. I kept thinking about my daughter playing in a park built on poison, getting sick, and me knowing I could have prevented it. Victor will destroy you if he finds out. Maybe. But I'll be able to look my daughter in the eye. That's worth more than any job. What's on the drive? Everything. The original contamination reports showing plumes down to 60 feet in some areas. The geological surveys indicating unstable soil that would require massive reinforcement. The hydrologist's warning about seasonal flooding that would spread contamination throughout the development. And emails, Victor's emails directing the consultant to adjust the findings to support his timeline. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. This is criminal fraud. It's business as usual for Victor. He's done it before, always careful to maintain plausible deniability. But this time he got sloppy. He put too much in writing, pushed too hard for speed. Why? Marcus glanced around nervously. Pinnacle's board is considering a merger with a Chinese development firm. They want to show aggressive growth and minimal liabilities. Victor promised them Riverside would be profitable within 18 months. If he delivers, he becomes executive VP of the merged company. If he fails, he's gambling with people's lives for a promotion. He's gambling with everything, including mine, apparently. He had me followed after the board meeting, knows I've been asking questions. I'm supposed to be in Seattle right now at a conference, but I needed to give you this first. What will you do? Disappear for a while. My wife's family has a place in Vancouver. We'll stay there until this resolves one way or another. Marcus, this is evidence of criminal activity. You should go to the authorities. With what proof that I wasn't complicit? I've been Victor's assistant for 2 years. Everything goes through me. In his version of events, I'm the one who altered the reports. Marcus stood. Use the information however you need to. Just make sure it matters. Matters. After Marcus left, Ethan sat in the cafe for another hour, the flash drive feeling like it weighed 50 pounds in his pocket. He thought about calling Clara immediately, but something made him wait. This information was a weapon, but weapons needed to be used strategically, not emotionally. When he finally returned home, he found Tom Reeves's truck in his driveway and Tom himself in his garage, looking at the old drafting table Ethan had moved there years ago. "Heard you're back in the architecture game," Tom said without preamble. "Part-time consulting." "Bull. You're either in or out, Ethan. There's no halfway with you, never has been." "I have responsibilities. You have fear. There's a difference." Tom turned to face him. "You know what I see when I look at you? A man who's been hiding for 5 years, afraid that if he starts caring again, he'll lose everything again. You don't know. I know Angela leaving broke something in you. I know you retreated into this garage because cars are simpler than buildings, because machines don't abandon you when things get complicated. But Ethan, you're dying in here, slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. I'm fine. No, you're safe. And safe is killing you just as surely as Angela's restlessness killed her love for you." Tom moved toward the door, then paused. "That Clara Winslow, she sees it too. Sees what you could be if you'd stop being so afraid of what you were." After Tom left, Ethan stood in his garage, surrounded by the tools of his chosen trade, and admitted what he'd been denying for 5 years. He was afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of succeeding, afraid of wanting something beyond the safe boundaries he'd built around his life. The flash drive sat on his workbench like an accusation. The information it contained could destroy Victor, save the Riverside Project, vindicate everything Ethan had been arguing. But using it meant stepping fully back into a world he'd abandoned, meant risking the quiet stability he'd built for Sophie. "Dad?" Sophie's voice came from the doorway. "You okay?" Complicated question, Butterfly. She came over and hugged him, her head now reaching his chest. "Is this about the bad man and his poison buildings?" "Partly." "And partly about Mom." Ethan looked down at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Tom Reeves has a loud voice, and you always get sad when someone mentions her." Sophie pulled back to look at him. "Do you miss her?" "I miss who she was before she became unhappy. I miss who I was before I made her that way." "Did you make her unhappy?" "I wanted her to be something she wasn't. Satisfied with ordinary life, content with routine, happy in one place with one person. I loved her, but I loved my idea of her more than who she actually was." "That's why she left?" "That's why she had to leave. Staying was killing her spirit, and watching her spirit die was killing me. When she left, it hurt, but it was also a relief. We could both stop pretending." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Miss Winslow doesn't seem like someone who pretends." "No, she doesn't. And you don't pretend anymore either. Except about being just a mechanic." Ethan pulled his daughter close. "When did you get so wise?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly. Sometimes Saturdays if I'm not busy with science projects." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan plugged in the flash drive. What he found was worse than Marcus had indicated. Not just fraud, but systematic deception spanning multiple projects, all bearing Victor's digital signature. Emails discussing how to hide contamination, how to pressure inspectors, how to structure contracts to avoid liability when problems inevitably surfaced. One email thread particularly caught his attention. Victor discussing the Riverside Project with someone identified only as JL. "The mechanic is becoming a problem. Can you handle him the way you handled the Seattle situation?" "The Seattle situation." Ethan searched through the files until he found it. a whistleblower named David Park who tried to expose contamination at Meadowbrook Estates. He'd been discredited through a manufactured scandal involving falsified drug tests and anonymous tips about embezzlement that turned out to be unfounded but destroyed his reputation anyway. Ethan's phone rang. Clara. "You need to see the news," she said without preamble. He turned on his laptop, navigating to the local news site. The headline made his stomach drop. Local mechanic under investigation for insurance fraud. The article was thin on facts but heavy on implication. Anonymous sources claimed Ethan had been inflating repair costs and billing insurance companies for work never performed. The investigation was preliminary, no charges filed, but the damage was done. The comment section was already filling with vitriol about crooked mechanics and thieves in coveralls. "Victor," Ethan said. "Obviously, he's trying to discredit you before you can damage him. Ethan, if there's anything in your past he could use, there isn't. My books are clean. Always have been." Then we fight back. I know journalists who would love this story. Prominent developer attacks whistleblower to hide contamination. No, that makes me the story instead of Riverside. Besides, I have something better. He told her about Marcus's visit, about the flash drive, about what he'd found. Clara's silence stretched so long he thought the connection had dropped. "Clara? This changes everything. We need to meet with Crawford immediately before Victor can do more damage." Crawford won't care about Victor's past projects. He's only interested in Riverside's profitability. Then we make him care. We show him that Victor's approach isn't just morally wrong but financially catastrophic. With this data, we can prove that the lawsuits alone would destroy any profit margin. There's more. Victor mentioned someone with the initials JL who handled problems for him. We need to find out who that is. "James Lowry," Clara said immediately. "He's a consultant who specializes in opposition research and reputation management. He's also utterly ruthless and completely amoral." "You know him?" "He tried to destroy me 8 years ago when I opposed a project that would have demolished low-income housing for luxury condos. Manufactured a story about me having an affair with a city councilman, leaked financial records that were taken completely out of context. I survived, barely, but others haven't been so lucky. So Victor's playing dirty from the start." "Victor doesn't know any other way to play." Clara paused. "Ethan, this is going to get worse before it gets better. He's not going to stop with one news story. If you want to walk away, I'm not walking away. Not from this project, not from doing what's right." He looked at the family photo on his desk, him, Sophie, and the space where Angela used to be. "I spent 5 years walking away from things that mattered. I'm done running." The next morning brought 3 cancellations at the shop, customers who'd seen the news and suddenly didn't trust him with their cars. Marcus, filling in for the absent Marcus Chen, handled the calls with steady professionalism, but Ethan could see the worry in his eyes. "Boss, maybe you should make a statement. Tell your side. My side doesn't matter if people want to believe the worst. We just keep doing good work. Truth has a way of surfacing even when people try to bury it. Like contaminated soil." Exactly like contaminated soil. Sophie had refused to go to school, declaring that if people were going to tell lies about her father, she needed to be there to defend him. It took Ethan 20 minutes and a promise that she could attend the next board meeting to convince her otherwise. Crawford agreed to meet that afternoon, but not at Pinnacle, at his home in the West Hills, a modernist masterpiece that Ethan had actually consulted on 15 years earlier, though Crawford didn't seem to remember. "I don't like being manipulated, Mr. Cole," Crawford began, gesturing for Ethan to sit in his study that overlooked the city. "And this feels like manipulation. The only manipulation here is Victor's. He's been lying to you from the beginning." Ethan handed over copies of the key documents from Marcus's flash drive. The real contamination data, the real risks, the real costs. Crawford reviewed them in silence, his expression never changing, though Ethan noticed his jaw tightening progressively. "How did you obtain these?" "From someone with a conscience who couldn't stand by and watch families be poisoned for profit." That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. The source is protected, but the information is real. You can verify it independently. In fact, I encourage you to. Crawford set down the papers. Assuming this is accurate, what do you want? I want Victor removed from the project. I want a full, independent environmental assessment, and I want the development done right, even if it takes longer and costs more. You're asking me to admit that Pinnacle made a mistake in trusting Victor, that we failed in our due diligence. I'm asking you to prevent a catastrophe that would destroy Pinnacle's reputation permanently. Imagine the headlines: Pinnacle development knowingly built on toxic land. Imagine the lawsuits, the criminal investigations, the shareholders calling for your head. Crawford walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Victor's brought in 3 major projects this year, worth over $200 million in potential revenue. Revenue that becomes liability when those projects fail. And they will fail, Mr. Crawford. Victor's not building for the future. He's building for the next quarterly report. And you? What are you building for? Ethan thought of Sophie, of the world she'd inherit. I'm building for my daughter, for her children, for the idea that we can create something without destroying something else in the process. Idealism doesn't pay dividends. Neither does criminal fraud. Crawford turned, and for the first time Ethan saw uncertainty in his eyes. If I act on this information, Victor won't go quietly. He has connections, resources, a vindictive streak that borders on pathological. He's already coming after me. The insurance fraud story is just the beginning. Yes, I heard about that. Sloppy work. Anyone who looks closely will see it's manufactured. But most people don't look closely, do they? Crawford returned to his desk. I'll order an independent assessment, completely separate from both companies. If it confirms your data, Victor's gone. If not, it will confirm it. Chemistry doesn't lie, even when developers do. We'll see. The assessment team will be on site Monday. Until then, suspend all work on the project. And Victor will be informed that the project is under review pending environmental verification. How he reacts to that news will be telling. As Ethan left Crawford's house, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed in your garage, mechanic. What comes next is on you. He forwarded it to Clara, then called Tom Reeves. I need a favor. Can you pick up Sophie from school today and maybe keep an eye on her for a few days? Victor threatening her? Not directly, but men like him don't always distinguish between combatants and civilians. She'll be safe with me. What about you? I'll be fine. I've got work to do. That evening, Ethan found his shop vandalized, windows broken, fraud, spray painted across the bay doors, tools scattered and damaged. The police took a report but warned him that without cameras or witnesses, finding the perpetrators was unlikely. Probably kids who saw the news, the officer said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Ethan spent the night cleaning up, refusing offers of help from Tom and Marcus. This was his fight, his consequence to bear. But as he swept up broken glass, he thought about David Park in Seattle, about everyone who'd tried to stand up to Victor and been crushed. The difference was, Ethan had already lost everything once. He'd lost his wife, his career, his identity as an architect. He'd survived that loss, rebuilt himself into something different, if not better. Victor could take his reputation, his shop, maybe even his safety. But he couldn't take Ethan's knowledge, his integrity, or his determination to keep Sophie safe from men who would poison children for profit. Clara arrived as he was boarding up the broken windows, carrying coffee and looking like she'd had her own sleepless night. I heard about the vandalism, she said, handing him a cup. Cost of doing business, apparently. This isn't business, Ethan. This is personal now. Victor's made it personal. It was always personal. The moment he decided profit mattered more than people's lives, it became personal. The insurance fraud investigation, I can have my lawyers. No, let it play out. The truth will come out. And if it doesn't, if Victor's narrative wins, Ethan looked at his vandalized shop, then at Clara. Then we build a better narrative. We show people what's really at stake, not just at Riverside, but everywhere Victor's built his houses of cards. That sounds like you're declaring war. No, I'm declaring that some things are worth fighting for. Clean soil, safe homes, the idea that expertise matters more than salesmanship. He turned to face her fully. Are you with me? Clara didn't hesitate. Completely. They stood there in the dawn light, two people who'd chosen principle over profit, surrounded by broken glass and spray-painted accusations, and planned how to save 40 acres of land from becoming 40 acres of poison. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday arrived wrapped in fog so thick that the riverside site looked like something from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Ethan stood at the chain-link fence watching the independent assessment team unload their equipment, their white hazmat suits ghost-like in the mist. Clara stood beside him, her presence solid and reassuring despite the tension that radiated from both of them. "They're from TerraTech Environmental," she said quietly. "Best in the business." Crawford didn't mess around. "Neither will Victor." Ethan nodded toward the black Mercedes pulling up to the site. Victor emerged, his face a mask of controlled fury, followed by two men in expensive suits who had the look of lawyers ready for battle. "Mr. Cole," Victor said, approaching them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I heard about your shop. Terrible thing, vandalism. The neighborhood must be going downhill." "The neighborhood's fine. It's the people passing through who are the problem." Victor's smile widened. "You know, I've been thinking about your situation. A single father struggling to make ends meet, suddenly thrust into a world he abandoned years ago. It must be overwhelming. Perhaps you should consider stepping back, focusing on what you know, carburetors and oil changes." "I know contamination when I see it," Ethan replied evenly, "whether it's in soil or in business practices." "Careful, Mr. Cole. Slander is a serious offense. So is fraud, environmental negligence, falsifying reports." Ethan met Victor's gaze steadily. "Should I continue?" One of Victor's lawyers stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, you should be aware that any unfounded allegations against Mr. Hale or Pinnacle Development could result in significant legal consequences." "Unfounded?" Clara interjected. "We'll see what TerraTech finds." "They'll find exactly what we reported," Victor said confidently. "Manageable contamination, easily contained with standard capping procedures." "Contamination down to 30 feet?" "Precisely." Ethan pulled out his phone, showing a photograph he'd taken of the assessment team's preliminary readings. "Interesting, because they've already detected contamination at 42 feet in their first boring sample. Want to revise your statement?" The color drained from Victor's face, but he recovered quickly. "Preliminary readings are often inaccurate." "Mr. Hale!" Dr. Sarah Hutchinson, TerraTech's lead assessor, approached them, her expression grim. "We need to discuss our initial findings. I'm sure any anomalies can be explained." 63 feet, Dr. Hutchinson interrupted. "We found contamination down to 63 feet in the southeastern quadrant. Benzene levels that exceed federal limits by 300%. This is not manageable, Mr. Hale. This is a crisis." Victor's lawyers immediately went into damage control mode, talking about measurement errors and the need for additional testing, but Ethan saw the truth in Victor's eyes. He'd known. He'd always known. "We're suspending all development immediately," Dr. Hutchinson continued. "This site needs full remediation before any construction can even be considered. We're talking years, not months." "This is Cole's doing," Victor snarled, abandoning pretense. "He's sabotaged the samples." "Are you suggesting I contaminated 40 acres of land over the weekend?" Ethan asked mildly. "That would be quite an accomplishment for just a mechanic, Doctor." Hutchinson looked between them, her expression showing she understood there was more going on than environmental assessment. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Winslow, I'd like to review your alternative proposal. If the contamination is as extensive as our initial findings suggest, traditional capping won't work. We need innovative solutions." As they walked toward the assessment team's mobile laboratory, Victor grabbed Ethan's arm. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but I have resources you can't imagine." Ethan carefully removed Victor's hand. "You have money and connections. I have truth and time. Let's see which proves stronger." Inside the mobile lab, Dr. Hutchinson spread out the initial findings. The contamination map looked like a cancer scan, dark spots spreading across the entire site, with concentrations that made Clara gasp. "How did the original assessment miss this?" she demanded. "It didn't," Dr. Hutchinson said carefully. "These patterns, these concentrations, someone would have had to work very hard not to see them. Or work very hard to hide them, Ethan added, thinking of Marcus Chen's flash drive locked in his home safe. Your proposal, Dr. Hutchinson said, turning to Ethan. The bioremediation approach. I've reviewed the basics, but I need more detail. How would you handle contamination this extensive? For the next 3 hours, Ethan laid out his vision. Not just cleaning the land, but transforming it into something that actively healed both soil and community. Mycoremediation using fungi to break down petroleum products. Phytoremediation with specific plants that absorbed heavy metals. Constructed wetlands that would filter runoff while creating habitat. Buildings designed to work with these systems, not despite them. The initial phase would take 18 months, he explained, showing his detailed timeline. Full remediation within 3 years. But here's the key. We don't wait to start development. We integrate it. The first structures would be greenhouses for the remediation plants, which later become community gardens. The water treatment facilities become architectural features, not hidden utilities. This is ambitious, Dr. Hutchinson said, but her tone was approving. Expensive, too. Less expensive than lawsuits when children get sick, Clara pointed out. Less expensive than demolishing buildings when the EPA forces a cleanup in 5 years. I'll include your proposal in my report to both boards, Dr. Hutchinson promised. Though I should warn you, Mr. Hale has already filed a formal complaint questioning the validity of our assessment. That afternoon, Ethan returned to his shop to find it busier than it had been all week. Tom Reeves had organized what he called a support party, customers and neighbors showing up to demonstrate that they still trusted Ethan despite the fraud allegations. People know BS when they smell it, Tom said, clapping Ethan on the back. And that story about insurance fraud? Pure BS. Sophie was there too, having convinced Tom that helping at the shop was educational. She was explaining hydraulic principles to Mrs. Chen while actually checking her brake fluid, her small hands steady and sure. Dad, she called out, running over. Did you stop the bad man? We're working on it, Butterfly. Good, because I have an idea for the remediation project. What if we used sunflowers? They absorb heavy metals, and they're pretty. People would like living near sunflower fields better than brown dirt. That's brilliant, Ethan said, and meant it. We could have a whole section dedicated to sunflower remediation. Can I help design it? I'm counting on it. That evening, as Ethan was closing the shop, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Angela stood there, looking exactly as she had 5 years ago, yet completely different. The restless energy that had always surrounded her had been replaced by something calmer, more centered. Hello, Ethan. Angela. He set down his wrench carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever moment this was. Sophie's not here. I know. I'm not here to see Sophie, not yet. She entered the shop, her designer boots incongruous against the oil-stained floor. I heard about what you're doing. The Riverside Project, standing up to Victor Hale. News travels to Barcelona? I'm not in Barcelona. Haven't been for 2 years. I live in Seattle now. Have a gallery, a partner, a life that finally makes sense. She paused. And I heard about it because Victor Hale tried to hire me. Ethan's attention sharpened. Hire you for what? To claim that you were unstable during our marriage. Violent, even. He offered me $50,000 to sign an affidavit saying I left because I feared for my safety. And? Angela laughed, the same laugh that had once made him fall in love with her. I told him that Ethan Cole was many things, stubborn, inflexible, occasionally self-righteous, but violent? Never. You couldn't even kill spiders, always insisted on catching them and putting them outside. What did Victor say? He upped his offer to $100,000. She pulled out a recording device. So I recorded him. Figured you might find it useful, evidence of witness tampering or whatever lawyers call it. Ethan stared at the device. Why would you do this? Because whatever our problems were, you're a good man. And more importantly, you're a good father. Sophie deserves better than having her dad destroyed by someone like Victor Hale. How do you know what kind of father I am? Angela's expression softened. I've kept tabs. Through friends, social media, the occasional drive by the house. I've seen her science fair projects, her school photos, the way she smiles. She's happy, Ethan. Happier than she ever could have been with me in the picture. She misses you. She misses the idea of me. The mother she imagined, not the one I would have been. I was never meant for motherhood, we both know that. But you? You were born to be a father. Even when we were married, you were more parent than partner. Is that why you left? Because I was boring? No. I left because staying would have turned me into someone bitter and resentful, and that would have poisoned Sophie's childhood worse than any absence. She handed him the recording device. Use this however you need to. And Ethan? That Clara Winslow, she sees you, really sees you. Don't be too stubborn to see her back. After Angela left, Ethan sat in his empty shop, holding the recording device and thinking about second chances, about roads not taken, about the strange ways life circled back on itself. His phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Victor's fighting back. We need everything we have. He looked at the device in his hand, then at the photo of Sophie on his workbench. Everything they had might not be enough, but it was more than Victor expected. The man had made a crucial error. He'd assumed that people who chose principle over profit were weak, that integrity was just another word for naive. Tomorrow, Victor would learn otherwise. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7 in the morning, an hour designed to catch people off guard, unprepared. But Ethan had been up since 4 reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, every argument. Clara met him in the Pinnacle lobby at 6:30, her expression determined but tired. Victor's been working the phones all night, she said, calling in favors, making promises, probably threats. He's got 3 board members solidly on his side, maybe 4. And the others? Waiting to see which way the wind blows. Crawford's the key. If he supports us, others will follow. If not, then we make the wind blow our direction. The boardroom was already half full when they arrived. Victor stood at the presentation screen, his confidence restored, his suit impeccable, his smile sharp as broken glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he began without preamble, we're here because certain parties want to derail a profitable project with fear-mongering and exaggerated environmental concerns. Contamination at 63 feet is not exaggerated, Clara interjected. According to one assessment team, which may have been influenced by Mr. Cole's interference. That's a serious accusation, Crawford said from his seat at the head of the table. Do you have evidence? I have questions. How did Mr. Cole know to check the southeastern quadrant specifically? Why did contamination levels spike suddenly after his involvement? And why should we trust the word of a man under investigation for insurance fraud? Because that investigation is fraudulent itself, Ethan said, standing. Just like your environmental reports, just like your entire approach to development. He pulled out his laptop, connecting it to the presentation system. Let me show you something. Mr. Hale's last 3 projects, all with environmental issues post-construction. That's not relevant, Victor started. It establishes a pattern. But you're right, let's focus on Riverside. Ethan pulled up the real environmental data from Marcus's flash drive. These are the original reports, before Mr. Hale's adjustments. Note the dates, the signatures, the clear indication of contamination beyond 60 feet. Where did you get those? Victor demanded, his face flushing. From someone with a conscience. But if you want more current evidence, Ethan pulled out Angela's recording device. This is Mr. Hale attempting to bribe my ex-wife to make false accusations against me. Would you like to hear it? The room went silent. Crawford's expression was unreadable, but his fingers had stilled on the table, never a good sign for whoever had his attention. Play it, he said quietly. Angela's voice filled the room, clear and professional, followed by Victor's, offering money for lies, increasing his price when refused, his tone becoming threatening when she continued to resist. That proves nothing, Victor said when it finished, but his voice had lost its confidence. It's taken out of context. What context justifies bribing someone to commit perjury? Patricia Wong asked from her seat on the Winslow board. I was investigating Cole's background. Due diligence by offering $100,000 for false testimony? Crawford's voice was dangerously quiet. Victor, I've tolerated a lot from you because you produced results, but this crosses a line. The project can still be profitable, can it? Clara stood, taking over the presentation. Let's talk real numbers. Traditional capping of contamination this extensive, $28 million, with no guarantee it holds. Lawsuits when it fails, conservative estimate of $60 million. Loss of reputation, criminal investigations, the complete collapse of Pinnacle's credibility. Incalculable. She changed slides. Now Mr. Cole's bioremediation approach. Initial cost, $35 million. Higher, yes, but it actually solves the problem. It creates a development that becomes a model for sustainable urban renewal. It generates positive publicity worth millions in marketing, and it ensures that in 10 years we're celebrating success, not defending lawsuits. It would take 3 years, Victor protested. We promised investors 18 months. You promised investors 18 months, Crawford corrected, without board approval, without proper assessment, without considering the consequences. This is ridiculous. We're going to tank a $40 million project because a mechanic and his girlfriend think we should grow sunflowers. The dismissive tone was a mistake. Ethan saw several board members' expressions harden. Mr. Hale, Dr. Patricia Chen from Pinnacle's board spoke for the first time. I've been reviewing Mr. Cole's credentials. MIT summa cum laude, 15 years of award-winning sustainable architecture. Innovations in bioremediation that are still being studied in universities. Perhaps we should stop calling him just a mechanic and start listening to what he's saying. His credentials don't change the timeline. The timeline is irrelevant if we're building on poison, Crawford interrupted. Mr. Hale, effective immediately, you're suspended from the Riverside project pending a full investigation into your handling of the environmental assessments. You can't, I can, and I am. Security will escort you out and ensure you have no further access to project files. Victor stood slowly, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally, cold calculation. This isn't over. I have contracts, agreements, which our legal team will review thoroughly, Crawford said, particularly the clauses about ethical violations and fraudulent conduct. As security approached, Victor turned to Ethan. You destroyed everything. For what? So you can feel morally superior while you're fixing cars? No, Ethan said quietly. So my daughter can grow up in a world where doing the right thing matters more than doing the profitable thing. After Victor was escorted out, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted, tension releasing like a held breath finally exhaled. Mr. Cole, Crawford said, I owe you an apology. I should have listened from the beginning. You're listening now. That's what matters. I'm doing more than listening. I'm offering you the position of lead architect on the Riverside project. Full creative control, reporting directly to me and Ms. Winslow. Ethan glanced at Clara, who was trying to hide a smile. I still have my shop to run. Then run it. But give us 40 hours a week to fix this mess and build something extraordinary. The salary would be substantial. It's not about the money. No, Crawford agreed. It's about redemption. For the land, for the company, and perhaps for you as well. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. Sophie's school. I need to take this, he said, stepping out. The call was brief but urgent. Sophie had collapsed during PE class and was being taken to the hospital. Clara found him in the hallway, his face white. What's wrong? Sophie's in the hospital. I have to go. I'll drive you. Clara said, Don't argue. Let's go. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain and traffic lights that seemed deliberately slow. Ethan's mind ran through every possibility, every worst-case scenario, his architectural precision deserting him in the face of parental terror. She's strong, Clara said, navigating through traffic with focused efficiency. Whatever this is, she's strong. She's 10. And she stood up to a room full of board members like she was born to it. That's not a fragile child, Ethan. They found Sophie in the emergency room, conscious but pale, an IV in her arm and a doctor reviewing test results. She smiled when she saw him. Dad, I'm okay. Just got dizzy and they're being super careful. What happened, Butterfly? The doctor, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up from her chart. Mr. Cole? I'm Dr. Martinez. Sophie experienced a vasovagal syncope episode. Basically, she fainted. But given the circumstances, we ran some additional tests. What circumstances? Dr. Martinez hesitated. Sophie mentioned she's been helping with a contamination cleanup project, handling soil samples for her science project. Some of her symptoms, the dizziness, mild nausea, the rash on her hands, are consistent with exposure to certain industrial chemicals. Ethan's blood turned cold. She was at the Riverside site last week. We were taking soil samples for her project on bioremediation. From the contaminated areas? From what we thought were the edges, the safer zones. But if the contamination has spread further than the original reports indicated, Dr. Martinez's expression grew serious. We'll need to run specific tests for heavy metals and petroleum products. In the meantime, Sophie needs to avoid any further exposure. As the doctor left to order tests, Sophie reached for Ethan's hand. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I should have been more careful. This isn't your fault, Butterfly. None of this is your fault. Is this because of the bad man's poison? Maybe. We're going to find out. Clara had been standing quietly by the door, but now she stepped forward. Sophie, would it be okay if I made some calls? I know specialists who deal with environmental exposure. Sophie nodded, then looked at her father. She's nice. Mom would have liked her. After Clara left to make calls, Ethan sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand and fighting the rage building inside him. If Sophie was sick because of Riverside's contamination, if Victor's lies had poisoned his daughter, Dad, you're squeezing too hard. He loosened his grip. Sorry, Butterfly. Are you going to hurt the bad man? No. Are you going to destroy him with truth and justice and really good architecture? Despite everything, Ethan smiled. That's the plan. Good. Because violence is never the answer, but sometimes karma needs an architect. The test results came back 3 hours later. Elevated levels of benzene and toluene in Sophie's blood. Not immediately dangerous, but concerning enough to require monitoring and treatment. The source was almost certainly the Riverside soil. Clara returned with Dr. James Roth, a specialist in environmental medicine who'd flown in from Seattle at her expense. The good news, Dr. Roth said after examining Sophie, is that children are remarkably resilient. With proper treatment and no further exposure, Sophie should recover completely within a few weeks. And the bad news? Ethan asked. If the contamination at Riverside is extensive enough to affect someone from brief exposure at the periphery, then the entire surrounding neighborhood is at risk. We're not just talking about future development. We're talking about current residents in a 3-block radius. Clara pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency press conference. This needs to be public now. That'll destroy the project, Ethan pointed out. The project's already destroyed. Now we're trying to save lives. As Clara made arrangements, Ethan sat with Sophie, who was sketching in the notebook he'd brought her. What are you drawing? The new Riverside, with sunflower fields and special buildings that clean the air and a playground that's actually safe for kids. She looked up at him. We're still going to build it, right? The good version? It'll take time. Years, maybe. That's okay. The best things are worth waiting for. She paused. That's what you told me about Mom coming back before I understood she wasn't going to. This is different. This we can actually make happen. I know, because you're not just a mechanic, and you're not just an architect. You're someone who fixes things that matter. The press conference was held in the hospital's auditorium, an unusual venue that added gravity to the announcement. Clara stood at the podium with Ethan beside her, while Sophie watched from a wheelchair she didn't need but the hospital insisted on. The Riverside Development Project has been indefinitely suspended, Clara began. Environmental testing has revealed contamination levels that pose immediate health risks to anyone exposed to the site. The questions came fast and fierce. How had this been missed? Who was responsible? What about neighboring communities? Ethan took the microphone. The contamination was not missed, it was hidden. Deliberately, systematically hidden by people who valued profit over public safety. My daughter is currently being treated for chemical exposure she received while collecting soil samples for a school science project. If a 10-year-old's brief contact with the edge of the site caused illness, imagine what would have happened to families living there. Mr. Cole, one reporter called out, you were recently accused of insurance fraud. Why should we believe you? Because I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at the independent assessment data, the hospital records, the pattern of deception in previous developments. Truth doesn't require belief, it just requires examination. What happens to the site now? Another reporter asked. Clara took back the microphone. Now we do what should have been done from the beginning. Full remediation, no matter the cost or time. And when the land is clean, truly clean, we build something that honors both the community and the environment. Who will lead this new development? Clara glanced at Ethan. Someone who understands that the foundation determines everything that comes after. After the press conference, as they returned to Sophie's room, they found Crawford waiting for them. That was quite a performance, he said, but his tone wasn't hostile. It was the truth, Clara replied. Yes, it was. Which is why Pinnacle's board has voted to fully support the remediation project, whatever the cost. We'll also be conducting reviews of all Victor Hale's previous projects. He turned to Ethan. The offer stands. Lead architect, full creative control, the resources to do this right. I need to focus on Sophie right now. Of course. Take whatever time you need. But Mr. Cole, this city needs builders who care more about tomorrow than today. Your daughter's right. You're not just a mechanic. You're what we should have been looking for all along. That night, as Sophie slept in her hospital bed, Ethan stood at the window watching the city lights. Clara joined him, bringing coffee that was terrible but welcome. You know Victor won't give up, she said quietly. He'll fight this, claim defamation, try to salvage his career. Let him try. The truth's out now. The truth about Riverside. But there are other projects, other Victor Hales, other contaminated sites waiting for someone to care enough to fix them. Ethan turned to look at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop thinking small. Stop believing you're just anything. You have a gift, Ethan, not just for architecture, but for seeing what others miss or choose to ignore. I have a daughter to raise. Who's learning that standing up for what's right is more important than standing aside for what's easy? Clara paused. I'm not asking you to choose between being a father and being an architect. I'm suggesting you can be both, fully and completely. Like you're both a CEO and a mother? Exactly. It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. Before Ethan could respond, Sophie stirred in her bed. Are you two going to kiss or keep talking about architecture? Because I'm trying to sleep and the tension is really loud. Both adults laughed, the sound breaking the heaviness that had filled the room. Go back to sleep, Butterfly, Ethan said. Only if you promise to stop being just a mechanic and start being everything you're supposed to be. I promise. Good. And Miss Winslow? Thank you for helping my dad remember who he is. As Sophie drifted back to sleep, Ethan and Clara stood in comfortable silence, watching over a brave little girl who'd stood up to bullies and boards with equal courage, who saw sunflowers where others saw poison, who believed that the best things were worth waiting for and fighting for and building right the first time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Victor's counterattacks, the slow work of remediation, the careful construction of something better. But tonight, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and hope, a mechanic who was also an architect, a single father who was also a visionary, stood guard over his daughter and began to imagine not just buildings but futures, not just structures but possibilities. The foundation had been laid, truth on bedrock instead of lies on sand. Everything else would follow. The weeks following the press conference transformed Portland's perception of the Riverside project from a development opportunity into a cautionary tale about corporate greed and environmental responsibility. Sophie had been released from the hospital after 3 days, her recovery swift but serving as a constant reminder of what had almost been lost. She returned to school wearing her experience like a badge of honor, telling anyone who would listen about benzene levels and phytoremediation with the authority of someone who'd lived through the consequences of ignoring such things. Ethan had converted half of his garage into a makeshift architectural studio, drafting tables beside toolboxes, blueprints sharing wall space with timing belt diagrams. He'd hired Tom Reeves' son, Danny, to manage the shop's daily operations, freeing him to split his time between fixing cars and fixing Riverside's future. The familiar rhythm of manual labor in the morning, followed by design work in the afternoon, gave his days a balance he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "Mr. Cole, we have a problem," Crawford's voice came through the phone one Thursday morning as Ethan was reviewing soil remediation proposals. "Victor's filed a lawsuit. Defamation, breach of contract, intentional interference with business relations. He's seeking $40 million in damages." "Let him sue," Ethan replied, unsurprised. "The truth is an absolute defense against defamation. It's more complicated than that. He's also filed complaints with the Architectural Licensing Board, claiming you've been practicing without maintaining your license." Ethan's hand stilled on the blueprint he'd been annotating. His license had lapsed 3 years ago, another casualty of his retreat from the profession. "I haven't signed any official documents as an architect." "No, but you've been presenting yourself as one. Victor's lawyers are arguing that's fraud." "Then I'll renew my license." "It's not that simple. There are continuing education requirements, examination updates. It could take months." "Then I have work to do." Clara arrived at the garage that afternoon, finding Ethan surrounded by licensing requirement documents and study guides that looked like they hadn't been updated since the last century. "This is ridiculous," she said, pushing aside a stack of papers to sit on his workbench. "You designed the Riverside Pavilion. You're not some amateur who needs to prove basic competency. The law doesn't care about past accomplishments. If my license lapsed, I need to meet current requirements." He gestured at the pile of materials. 40 hours of continuing education, updated building codes, new environmental regulations, which, ironically, I probably understand better than the people who wrote them. "How long will it take?" "To do it properly? 2 months minimum. But we don't have 2 months. The remediation needs to start before winter, or we lose another year." "Then we work around it. You consult, I sign the official documents." "That's not how it works, Clara. The plans need to be right. Whether your signature is on them or not doesn't change their validity." She picked up his latest design, a community center that would double as a living air filter. "This is brilliant, license or no license. Tell that to the licensing board." "I will, if necessary." She paused, studying him. "You know Victor's doing this to delay us, to make the project so complicated that the boards give up." "I know, but he's also right, technically. I let my license lapse because I thought I was done with architecture. That was short-sighted." Sophie appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression serious. "Dad, there's something happening at school you need to know about." "Are you feeling sick again?" "No, I'm fine. But Bradley Hale's been telling everyone that you're a fraud, that his dad's going to destroy you in court and take our house." Ethan's jaw tightened. Bradley's upset about his father. "It's not your problem to solve." "Maybe not, but I invited him to come see the shop." "You what?" "He doesn't believe you actually fix cars. He thinks it's all a lie, like his dad says. So I told him to come see for himself." "He's outside." Ethan looked through the window to see Bradley Hale standing uncertainly by the shop entrance, his expensive uniform out of place among the oil stains and tool racks. "Sophie, this isn't appropriate. Dad, he's 10. He's not responsible for what his father does. And maybe if he sees that you really do fix things, he'll understand that not everything his dad says is true." Clara touched Ethan's arm. "She's right. The sins of the father shouldn't fall on the son." Ethan walked to the door, opening it to find Bradley trying to look defiant, but mostly looking lost. "Bradley." "Mr. Cole, Sophie said, she said you could show me how engines work." "Did she?" "She said you're the best mechanic in Portland. My dad says that's a lie." "Your dad says a lot of things. Want to find out what's true?" For the next hour, Ethan showed Bradley the intricacies of internal combustion, the precision required to rebuild an engine, the satisfaction of fixing something broken. The boy was smart, asking good questions, his hostility gradually giving way to genuine interest. "My dad doesn't know how to fix anything," Bradley said quietly, watching Ethan reassemble a carburetor with practiced efficiency. "He just pays people to do it." "There's nothing wrong with that. People have different skills." "But you can fix cars and design buildings. Sophie says you're going to clean up the poison at Riverside. That's the plan." My dad says the poison isn't real, that you made it up. Ethan set down his tools, choosing his words carefully. Bradley, sometimes adults disagree about complicated things. Your dad believes what he believes, but the soil tests, the hospital records, my daughter getting sick, those aren't opinions, they're facts. Sophie really got sick? She did. She's better now, but yes. Bradley was quiet for a moment. My mom's been coughing a lot. We live near another one of Dad's buildings, the Meadowbrook place. Ethan's blood chilled. Meadowbrook Estates, where 15 families had reported respiratory issues. How long has she been coughing? 6 months, maybe more. Dad says it's allergies, but she never had allergies before we moved there. Bradley, has your mom seen a doctor? Dad says doctors overreact, that they'll find problems that aren't there. Ethan glanced at Clara, who was already pulling out her phone, likely calling Dr. Roth. Bradley, would your mom be willing to get tested, just to be safe? I don't know. Maybe. Dad would be really mad. Sometimes being mad is less important than being safe. Sophie, who'd been quietly organizing tools, spoke up. Bradley, my dad gave up being a famous architect to keep me safe. That's what parents are supposed to do. Keep their kids safe, even when it's hard or expensive or inconvenient. Bradley looked between them, and for a moment, Ethan saw Victor in the boy's face. The same sharp features, the same calculating eyes. But then something shifted, a vulnerability that Victor had probably trained out of himself decades ago. I'll ask her, Bradley said finally. But don't tell my dad I was here. After the boys left together, discussing something about a school project with the enthusiasm of newfound alliance, Clara turned to Ethan. If residents at Meadowbrook are getting sick, then Victor's pattern of negligence becomes criminal. Ethan was already reaching for his phone. We need to document everything. Every sick resident, every covered-up report, every property he's developed. That's a massive undertaking. Then we'd better get started. Over the next 3 weeks, while Ethan rushed through his licensing requirements, Clara assembled a team of investigators, health professionals, and environmental scientists. What they found was worse than either had imagined. 7 developments over 5 years, all with environmental issues, all with residents reporting health problems, all with paperwork that had been carefully managed to avoid connecting the dots. Mrs. Hale did get tested, secretly, with Clara arranging everything through Dr. Roth. The results showed elevated levels of industrial chemicals consistent with long-term exposure to contaminated air. She wasn't alone. Dozens of Meadowbrook residents showed similar results. We need to go public with this, Clara insisted during one of their late-night planning sessions in Ethan's garage-turned-studio. Not yet. If we move too fast, Victor's lawyers will claim we're orchestrating a witch hunt. We need ironclad documentation, verified medical records, a clear pattern that can't be dismissed. People are sick, Ethan. And they'll be sicker if Victor's allowed to continue. We do this right, we stop him permanently. We do it wrong, he walks away and keeps building on poisoned ground. Sophie, who was supposed to be asleep but had developed a talent for strategic eavesdropping, appeared in the doorway. Bradley says his parents are getting divorced. Sophie, you should be in bed. His mom's leaving. She found out about the contamination, about Dad hiding it. She's taking Bradley and moving to her sister's house in Bend. Ethan and Clara exchanged glances. A divorce would mean discovery, documents, potential evidence that Victor couldn't control or hide. That's sad for Bradley, Ethan said carefully. He's actually relieved. He says his dad's been different lately, meaner, more desperate. Sophie climbed onto Ethan's lap, something she rarely did anymore. Dad, are we safe? Victor Hale seems like someone who might do bad things when he's desperate. We're safe, Butterfly. I promise. But even as he said it, Ethan wondered if it was true. The lawsuit was progressing, Victor's lawyers deploying every delay tactic and procedural manipulation possible. The licensing board was dragging its feet on his renewal application, citing irregularities that seemed to appear whenever Victor's name was mentioned. And there had been incidents, mysterious electrical problems at the shop, Clara's office files disappearing, Tom Reeves getting audited by the IRS despite his books being cleaner than a surgical suite. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen, Victor's former assistant, reached out through encrypted email from Vancouver. "I've been following the news," his message read. "There's more you need to know. Victor's been doing this longer than 5 years. There's a storage unit in Southeast Portland, number 447 at Secure Store on Division. He keeps his real records there, the ones his lawyers don't know about. The combination is his daughter's birthday. He doesn't have a daughter, but he uses his mistress's daughter's birthday, July 15th, 12. Be careful. He's more dangerous when cornered than you know." Ethan showed the message to Clara. "This could be a trap. Or it could be the evidence we need. We should tell the police." "Tell them what?" "That we received an anonymous tip about a storage unit that might contain evidence of crimes we can't prove yet." "Then what do you suggest?" "We go look. Document everything. Then bring in authorities with something concrete. That's breaking and entering. That's investigating. Marcus gave us the combination. Technically, we have permission from someone with knowledge of the unit." Clara stared at him. "That's the kind of logic that would make Victor proud." "No, Victor would have someone else do it and maintain plausible deniability. I'm taking responsibility for my choices." They went that night after Sophie was asleep at Tom's house, telling him they were meeting with lawyers about the lawsuit. The storage facility was one of those places that promised security but delivered mostly indifference. Cameras that might or might not work. Gates that looked imposing but opened with any 4-digit code. Unit 447 was in the back corner, far from the main office. The combination worked, the lock clicking open with a sound that seemed too loud in the empty corridor. Inside, Ethan found exactly what Marcus had promised. Boxes of documents. Real environmental reports. Correspondence with inspectors who'd been paid to look the other way. Photographs of contamination that had been covered up before official inspections. It was a catalog of criminal negligence spanning almost a decade. "My God," Clara whispered, reading through a file about a development in Eugene where 3 children had developed leukemia. He knew. He always knew. He didn't just know. He calculated the cost-benefit. "Look." Ethan showed her a spreadsheet, Victor's own analysis of lawsuit probabilities versus profit margins. He literally assigned dollar values to potential cancer cases. They photographed everything, careful not to disturb the original order. It took 3 hours, their phones filled with evidence that would destroy Victor Hale completely. As they were leaving, Ethan noticed another box, newer than the others. Inside were surveillance photos of him, of Clara, of Sophie walking to school. "He's been watching us," Clara said, her voice tight. "For weeks. From the dates on these." Ethan found photos of his shop, their homes, even Tom Reeves's house where Sophie sometimes stayed. "This isn't business anymore. This is personal. We need to go to the police now." Agreed. But as they left the storage unit, they found Victor waiting by their car, not alone. James Lowry stood beside him, the consultant who specialized in destroying people's lives. "Breaking and entering," Victor said, his smile cold in the security light's harsh glare. "That's a felony, Mr. Cole." "Miss Winslow. Not quite the moral high ground you usually claim." "We had the combination," Clara said steadily, "given to us by someone with authorization to access the unit. Marcus Chen, my former employee who's currently wanted for embezzlement? Yes, we filed charges yesterday. Seems he stole quite a bit before fleeing to Canada." "That's a lie." "Prove it." "Meanwhile, I have you on camera breaking into my storage unit." Victor held up his phone, showing a video of them entering. "Unless, of course, we can come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Ethan asked, though he knew the answer. "Simple. Drop the Riverside remediation. Withdraw your accusations. Disappear back to your garage and stay there. In return, this video disappears, the lawsuits go away, and your daughter stays safe." The threat to Sophie hung in the air like poison gas. "You're threatening a child." Clara's voice was ice. "I'm stating facts. The world's a dangerous place. Accidents happen. People get sick from all sorts of environmental factors." Victor's smile widened. "Just ask the families at Meadowbrook." Ethan stepped forward, and Lowry moved to intercept, but Ethan wasn't attacking. He was simply standing straighter, taller, every inch the architect he'd always been beneath the mechanic's coveralls. "You made 3 mistakes, Victor," Ethan said quietly. "First, you assumed fear would work on someone who's already lost everything once and survived. Second, you kept records of your crimes because your ego needed proof of how clever you were. And third, you threatened my daughter. He pulled out his phone, showing that it had been recording the entire conversation. Threatening a child, admitting to surveillance, attempting blackmail, all recorded. But here's the thing, Victor. I'm not you. I don't want to destroy you. I want to stop you. There's a difference. That recording's inadmissible. In court, maybe. But the court of public opinion, the news media, your investors who are already nervous about the Riverside scandal? Ethan pocketed the phone. You have 24 hours to resign from Pinnacle, withdraw all lawsuits, and turn yourself in for the environmental crimes documented in that storage unit, or everything we found tonight goes public, along with this recording of you threatening a 10-year-old girl. You're bluffing. Call it. See what happens. But remember, you've been so focused on destroying me that you forgot something crucial. I actually don't care about my reputation anymore. I care about my daughter, about the families you've poisoned, about building something better on clean ground. You can't threaten someone who's not afraid of losing, Victor. And thanks to you, I've already lost everything that doesn't matter and kept everything that does. Lowry whispered urgently in Victor's ear, probably explaining the legal ramifications of recorded blackmail and threats against a minor. Victor's face cycled through rage, calculation, and finally, something like defeat. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. As Victor and Lowry left, Clara leaned against the car, shaking slightly. Did you really record all that? Ethan showed her his phone, every word captured in digital clarity. We need to get this to the police tonight, Clara said. First, we make copies. Multiple copies. Then the police, the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit, the media. Victor's right about one thing. The world is dangerous. But it's dangerous for people like him too, when enough light shines on what they do in the dark. They drove to Clara's office, making copies of everything, uploading files to secure cloud servers, creating a trail that couldn't be destroyed or buried. As dawn broke over Portland, they walked into the FBI field office with boxes of evidence that would unravel not just Victor Hale, but an entire network of environmental crimes. The next few days moved with surreal speed. Victor's arrest made national news. The storage unit evidence led to investigations of dozens of developments across 3 states. Families who'd been sick for years finally had answers, and more importantly, legal recourse. Mrs. Hale called Ethan to thank him. Bradley told me about visiting your shop, about you showing him that people can build and fix things, not just break them. He wants to be an engineer now. He's a good kid. None of this is his fault. No, but he's living with the consequences anyway. We all are. She paused. Mr. Cole, my lawyer will be in touch about testifying. Bradley and we want to help however we can. The licensing board expedited Ethan's renewal after the FBI made it clear that their delays had been influenced by someone now under federal investigation. Within 2 weeks, Ethan had his architecture license restored, though it felt anticlimactic after everything else. Sophie's science project on bioremediation won not just the school fair, but the state championship, with judges particularly impressed by her lived experience with environmental contamination and recovery. She donated the prize money to a fund for Meadowbrook family's medical expenses. You know what this means? Crawford said during a meeting to officially appoint Ethan as lead architect for the Riverside restoration. You're not just designing a development. You're creating a template for how to reclaim poisoned land across the country. It's still going to take 3 years minimum, Ethan reminded him. Some things are worth doing right, even if they take time, Crawford replied. I believe a wise 10-year-old said something similar recently. Clara had been quiet during the meeting, but afterward, as they stood at the Riverside site watching the first phase of remediation begin, she took his hand. You did it, she said. You stopped him. We did it. All of us. No, Ethan. You stood up when standing up meant risking everything. You showed Sophie and Bradley and everyone watching that integrity matters more than income, that some things can't be bought or sold or buried under convenient lies. I'm just a mechanic who remembers how to draw buildings. Clara laughed. You're the least just anything I've ever met. You're a father, an architect, a mechanic, and someone who rebuilds things everyone else has written off as too broken to save. Speaking of rebuilding, Ethan pulled out a set of plans. I want to show you something. The drawings showed the complete Riverside vision, not just remediation, but transformation. Gardens that cleaned soil while providing food for the community. Buildings that breathed with living walls and generated more energy than they consumed. Community spaces designed to bring people together rather than apart. And at the center, a pavilion dedicated to environmental education, where children could learn about both contamination and recovery, about the mistakes of the past and the possibilities of the future. It's ambitious, Clara said, studying the plans. Sophie says anything less is for people who don't want to change the world. Smart kid. Gets it from her father. Her father the mechanic? Her father the man who fixes what's broken, builds what matters, and teaches by example that being just anything is a choice, not a sentence. That evening, Ethan picked Sophie up from school to find her waiting with Bradley and Maria, all three clutching science books and talking animatedly about mycorrhizal remediation networks. Dad, can Bradley come see the Riverside site? He wants to understand how the cleaning process works. If his mother approves. She already said yes. She says you're a good influence. As they drove to the site, Bradley peppered Ethan with questions about soil chemistry and bacterial cultures, his natural intelligence finally directed toward building rather than defending his father's destruction. At the site, they stood behind the safety barriers, watching the first treatment plots being established. Rows of specific plants chosen for there to absorb heavy metals, fungi cultures that would break down petroleum products. The beginning of healing that would take years but last generations. Mr. Cole, Bradley said quietly, I'm sorry about what my dad did. All of it. You're not responsible for your father's choices, Bradley. Only your own. I want to make better choices. Sophie's been teaching me about environmental science, and I think I want to learn how to fix things like this. Places my dad broke. Ethan looked at the boy, seeing not Victor's son, but simply a child trying to make sense of a complicated world. That's a good goal, Bradley. The world needs more fixers. Sophie took Bradley's hand, a gesture of friendship that transcended their father's conflict. Come on, I'll show you where the sunflower field is going to be. Dad designed it based on my idea. As the children explored, Clara joined Ethan at the barrier. You know the media's calling you the mechanic architect now, she said. The man who went from fixing cars to fixing cities. I'm still doing both. Danny's running the shop 3 days a week, but I'm keeping my morning appointments. There's something grounding about mechanical work, clear problems, definable solutions. And Sophie? How's she handling all the attention? Like she was born for it. She's already planning her next science project. Something about using restored brownfields for urban agriculture. 10 years old and already thinking about food security and land reclamation. Clara smiled. She's going to change the world. She already has. She changed mine. They stood together watching the sun set over the Riverside site. 40 acres that would have been 40 acres of hidden poison, if not for a mechanic who remembered how to be an architect, a father who chose courage over comfort, and a little girl who asked whether children would be safe playing in sandboxes built on lies. You know what the best part is? Sophie called out, returning with Bradley and Maria in tow. 3 years is actually perfect. By the time Riverside's done, I'll be 13, old enough to really understand what we built. And Bradley will be old enough to help with the next project. The next project? Ethan asked. There are contaminated sites all over Portland, Dad, all over the country. We can't fix them all, but we can show people how. We can teach them that being just anything is a lie people tell themselves when they're afraid to be everything they could be. Clara laughed. Your daughter's already planning your next career move. Our next move, Sophie corrected. Ms. Winslow, you're part of this too. Dad's going to need help, and you're the only one who can keep him from being too stubborn about taking big projects. Sophie, Ethan started. What? It's true. You two make a good team. Everyone can see it. Bradley nodded solemnly. Even my mom says so. She says Mr. Cole and Ms. Winslow are proof that good people can beat bad systems if they work together. As the children ran ahead to Tom Reeves' truck, which had just pulled up to take them for ice cream, Clara and Ethan stood alone in the gathering dusk. "She's not wrong," Clara said. "We do make a good team." "We do." "So what happens now? After Riverside's restored, after Victor's prosecuted, after the immediate fight is won?" Ethan turned to look at her, this woman who'd seen past the mechanic's coveralls to the architect beneath, who'd stood with him against corruption and threats, who'd helped him remember that being multiple things wasn't contradiction, but completion. "Now we build. Not just buildings, but better systems. We show people that development doesn't require destruction, that profit and principle can coexist. We take on the projects others won't touch, the poisoned places everyone's written off." That sounds like a mission statement for something bigger than one project. Maybe it is. Cole and Winslow Environmental Development, fixing what's broken, building what matters. "Winslow and Cole sounds better," Clara said with a smile. "We can negotiate that over dinner. Tomorrow night, after Sophie's rehearsal for the science fair presentation?" "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Cole?" "I'm asking you to consider a partnership, professional and otherwise." Before Clara could respond, Sophie's voice carried across the site. "Dad!" "Miss Winslow, come see. The first remediation plants are already sprouting." They walked toward the treatment plots where indeed the first green shoots were pushing through the contaminated soil, life insisting on itself despite the poison, growth happening because someone had decided healing was possible. "You know what you are?" Clara said, taking his hand as they walked. "You're proof that sometimes the best architects are the ones who've learned to work with their hands, who understand that before you can build up, you have to know what's underneath. You're not just a mechanic who became an architect again. You're someone who never stopped building, even when the only thing you could build was a safe life for your daughter. And now? Now you're building futures. For Sophie, for Bradley, for every family who'll live on clean land, because you refuse to let it stay poisoned." They reached the sprouting plants where Sophie was explaining root systems to Bradley with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found their calling. The sun was setting behind them, painting the contaminated land in shades of gold and possibility. "It's going to work," Sophie announced with complete confidence. "The remediation, the development, all of it. It's going to work because we're doing it right." "It's going to take time," Ethan reminded her. "The best things always do," Sophie replied, then grinned. "Besides, we're not just fixing Riverside. We're showing everyone that a mechanic and a CEO and a 10-year-old with a science project can change how cities think about poisoned land. That's worth taking time to do right." As they stood there, Ethan, Clara, Sophie, and even Bradley, who was finding his own way forward from his father's shadow, the Riverside site didn't look like 40 acres of contamination. It looked like 40 acres of potential, waiting for someone patient enough to heal it, visionary enough to transform it, and stubborn enough to insist that building right mattered more than building fast. "You know what?" Sophie said, looking up at her father. "You're not just a mechanic anymore." "No? No. You're a mechanic and an architect and a dad and someone who stands up to bullies and someone who shows kids like Bradley that they can be better than their parents' mistakes." She paused, then added with a grin, "But you're still going to fix Mrs. Chen's Honda tomorrow, right? She needs it for her doctor's appointment." "First thing in the morning," Ethan promised. Because that was the truth of it. He wasn't just anything. He was everything he'd chosen to be, everything circumstances had required him to become. A mechanic who fixed what was broken. An architect who built what mattered. A father who'd sacrificed ambition for obligation and found that the obligation had led him back to a better kind of ambition. The Riverside project would take 3 years to complete. But standing there in the fading light, surrounded by people who'd chosen principle over profit, watching the first plants begin their slow work of healing poisoned ground, Ethan knew that some foundations were worth laying carefully, some structures were worth building slowly, and some truths were worth defending even when the whole world seemed to insist that being just anything was enough. It wasn't enough. It never had been. And finally, after 5 years of hiding in his garage, Ethan Cole was ready to be everything he was meant to be. Not instead of being a mechanic, but in addition to it. Because fixing things, whether they were cars or cities or contaminated souls, was what he did. It was who he was, all of who he was.